Chapter 7. Allies. To Arch-Lector Sult, head of His Majesty's Inquisition, Your Eminence, work is underway on the defenses of the city. The famous land walls, though powerful, are in a shameful condition, and I have taken vigorous steps to strengthen them. I have also ordered extra supplies, food, armor, and weapons, essential if the city is to stand a siege of any duration. Unfortunately, the defenses are extensive, and the scale of the task vast. I have begun the work on credit, but credit will only stretch so far. I most humbly entreat that Your Eminence will send me funds with which to work. Without money our efforts must cease, and the city will be lost. The Union forces here are few, and morale is not high. There are mercenaries within the city, and I have ordered that more be recruited. But their loyalty is questionable, particularly if they cannot be paid. I therefore request that more of the king's soldiers might be sent. Even a single company could make a difference. You will hear from me soon. Until then I serve and obey. Sandan Glokta, Superior of Dagoska. This is the place, said Glokta. Said Frost. It was a rough building of 1 story, carelessly built from mud bricks, no bigger than a good-sized woodshed. Chinks of light spilled out into the night from around the ill-fitting door and the ill-fitting shutters in the single window. It was much the same as the other huts in the street, if you could call it a street. It hardly looked like the residence of a member of Dagoska's ruling council. But then Kadia is the odd man out in many ways. The leader of the natives, the priest without a temple. The one with least to lose, perhaps. The door opened before Glokta even had the chance to knock. Kadia stood in the doorway, tall and slender in his white robe. "Why don't you come in?" The Haddish turned, stepped over to the only chair and sat down in it. "Wait here," said Glokta. The inside of the shed was no more auspicious than the outside. Clean and orderly and poor as hell. The ceiling was so low that Glokta could only just stand upright. The floor was hard-packed dirt. A straw mattress lay on empty crates at one end of the single room, a small chair beside it. A squat cupboard stood under the window, a few books stacked on top, a guttering candle burning beside them, apart from a dented bucket for natural functions that appeared to be the full extent of Kadia's worldly possessions. No sign of any hidden corpses of superiors of the Inquisition, but you never know. A body can be packed away quite neatly if one cuts it into small enough pieces. You should move out of the slums. Glokta shut the door behind him on creaking hinges, limped to the bed and sat down heavily on the mattress. Native not permitted within the upper city, or had you not heard? I'm sure that an exception could be made in your case. You could have chambers in the citadel. Then I wouldn't have to limp all the way down here to speak to you. Chambers in the citadel? While my fellows rot down here in the filth, the least a leader can do is to share the burdens of his people. I have little other comfort to give them. It was sweltering hot down here in the lower city, but Kadia did not seem uncomfortable. His gaze was level, his eyes were fixed on Glokta's, dark and cool as deep water. "Do you disapprove?" Glokta rubbed at his aching neck. "Not in the least. Martyrdom suits you, but you'll have to forgive me if I don't join in." He licked at his empty gums. "I've made my sacrifices, perhaps not all of them. Ask your questions, straight to business then. Nothing to hide, or nothing to lose. Do you know what became of my predecessor, Superior Davist? It is my earnest hope that he died in great pain." Glokta felt his eyebrows lift. The very last thing I expected an honest answer. Perhaps the first honest answer that I have received to that question, but hardly one that frees him from suspicion. "In great pain, you say? Very great pain. And I will shed no tears if you join him." Glokta smiled. "I don't know that I can think of anyone who will. But Davist is the matter in hand. Were your people involved in his disappearance, it is possible. Davist gave us reasons enough. There are many families missing husbands, fathers, daughters because of his purges, his tests of loyalty, his making of examples. My people number many thousands, and I cannot watch them all. The one thing I can tell you is that I know nothing of his disappearance. When one devil falls, they always send another, and here you are. My people have gained nothing, except Davust's silence. Perhaps he discovered that you had made a deal with the Gurkish. Perhaps joining the Union was not all your people hoped for. Kadia snorted. You nothing. No Dagoskan would ever strike a deal with the Gurkish. To an outsider, the two of you seem to have much in common. To an ignorant outsider, we do. We both have dark skin, and we both pray to God. But that is the full extent of the similarity. We Dagoskans have never been a warlike people. We remained here on our peninsula, confident in the strength of our defenses, while the Gurkish Empire spread like a cancer across the Kantic continent. We thought their conquests were none of our concern. That was our folly. Emissaries came to our gates, demanding that we kneel before the Gurkish Emperor, and acknowledge that the prophet Khalul speaks with the voice of God. We would do neither, and Khalul swore to destroy us. Now it seems he will finally succeed. All of the south will be his dominion, and the Archlector will not be in the least amused. Who knows? Perhaps God will come to your aid. God favors those who solve their own problems. Perhaps we can solve some problems between us. I have no interest in helping you. Even if you help yourself as well, I have it in mind to issue a decree. The gates of the upper city will be opened. Your people will be allowed to come and go in their own city, as they please. The spices will be turned out of the great temple, and it shall once again be your sacred ground. The Dagagaskans will be permitted to carry arms. Indeed, we will provide you with weapons from our own armories. The natives will be treated like full citizens of the Union. They deserve nothing less, so. Kahadia clasped his hands together and sat back in his creaking chair. Now, with the Gurkish knocking at the gates, you come to Dagaska, flaunting your little scroll as though it was the word of God, and you choose to do the right thing. You are not like all the others. You are a good man, a fair man, a just man. You expect me to believe this, honestly? I don't care a shit what you believe, and I care about doing the right thing even less. That's all a matter of who you ask. As for being a good man, and Glokta curled his lip, that ship sailed long ago, and I wasn't even there to wave it off. I'm interested in holding Dagaska. That and nothing else. And you know you cannot hold Dagaska without our help. Neither one of us is a fool, Kadia. Don't insult me by acting like one. We can bicker with each other until the Gurkish tide sweeps over the land walls, or we can cooperate. You never know. Together we might even beat them. Your people will help us dig the ditch, repair the walls, hang the gates. You will provide 1,000 men to serve in the defense of the city, to begin with, and or later. Will I? Will I indeed? And if, with our help, the city stands, will our deal stand with it? If the city stands, I will be gone. More than likely, Verms and the rest will be back in charge, and our deal will be dust. If the city stands, you have my word that I will do everything possible. Everything possible, meaning nothing. You get the idea. I need your help, so I'm offering you what I can. I'd offer you more, but I don't have more. You could sulk down here in the slums with the flies for company and wait for the Emperor to come. Perhaps the great Uthmanel Dosht will offer you a better deal. Glokta looked Kadia in the eye for a moment, but we both know he won't. The priest pursed his lips, stroked his beard, then gave a deep sigh. They say a man lost in the desert must take such water as he is offered, no matter who it comes from. I accept your deal. Once the temple is empty, we will dig your holes, and carry your stone, and wear your swords. Something is better than nothing, and as you say, perhaps together we can even beat the Gurkish. Miracles do happen. So I've heard, said Glokta as he shoved on his cane and grunted his way to his feet, shirt sticking to his sweaty back. So I've heard, but I've never seen one. Glokta stretched out on the cushions in his chambers, head back, mouth open, resting his aching body. The same chambers that were once occupied by my illustrious predecessor, Superior Devost. They were a wide, airy, well-furnished set of rooms. Perhaps they once belonged to a Dagoskan prince, or a scheming vizier, or a dusky concubine, before the natives were thrown out into the dust of the lower city. Better by far than my poky shithole in the Agrient, except that superiors of the Inquisition have been known to go missing from these rooms. One set of windows faced northward, out towards the sea, on the steepest side of the rock. The other looked over the baking city. Both were equipped with heavy shutters. Outside it was a sheer drop over bare stone to jagged rocks and angry salt water. The door was 6 fingers thick, studded with iron, fitted with a heavy lock and 4 great bolts. He felt his mouth curving into a smile. How will they remove mine when they come? Already my enemies mount up the sneering verms, the punctilious Visbrook, the merchants whose profits I threaten, the practical who served Harker and Davust, the natives with good reason to hate anyone who wears black, my old enemies the Gurkish, of course, and all that providing His Eminence does not get anxious at the lack of progress and decide to have me replaced himself. Will anyone come searching for my twisted corpse, I wonder? Superior. Opening his eyes and lifting his head was a great and painful effort. Everything hurt from his exertions of the past few days. His neck clicked like a snapping twig with every movement. His back was stiff and brittle as a mirror. His leg veered between nagging agony and trembling numbness. Schickel was standing in the doorway, head bowed. The cuts and bruises on her dark face were healed. There was no outward sign of the ordeal she had suffered in the cells below. She never looked him in the eye, though, always at the floor. Some wounds take time to heal, and others never do. I should know. What is it, Schickel? Magister Ida sends you an invitation to dinner. Does she indeed? The girl nodded. Send word that I will be honored to attend. Glokta watched her pad out of the room, head bowed. Then he sagged back onto his cushions. If I disappear tomorrow, at least I will have saved one person. Perhaps that means my life has not been a total waste of time. Sandan Glokta, shield to the helpless. Is it ever too late to be a good man? Please, squealed Harker. Please. I know nothing. He was bound tightly to his chair, unable to move his body far. But he makes up for it with his eyes. They darted back and forth over Glokta's instruments, glittering in the harsh lamplight on the scarred tabletop. Oh yes, you understand better than most how this will work. Knowledge is so often the antidote to fear. But not here. Not now. I know nothing. I will be the judge of what you know. Glokta wiped some sweat from his face. The room was hot as a busy forge, and the glowing coals in the brazier were far from helping. If a thing smells like a liar, and is the color of a liar, the chances are it is a liar. Would you not agree? Please? We are all on the same side. Are we? Are we really? I have told you only the truth, perhaps, but not as much of it as I need. Please. We are all friends here. Friends, in my experience. A friend is merely an acquaintance who has yet to betray you. Is that what you are, Harker? No. Glokta frowned. Then you are our enemy. What? No. I wanted to know what happened. That's all. I didn't mean to please. Please, 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 I tire of hearing it. You have to believe me. The only thing I have to do is get answers. Only ask your questions, Superior. I beg of you. Only give me the opportunity to cooperate. Oh, indeed, the firm hand does not seem such a fine idea any longer, does it? Ask your questions. I will do my best to answer. Good. Glokta perched himself on the edge of the table just beside his tightly bound prisoner and looked down at him. Excellent. Harker's hands were tanned deep brown. His face was tanned deep brown. The rest of his body was pale as a white slug with thick patches of dark hair. Hardly a fetching look, but it could be worse. Answer me this, then. Why is it that men have nipples? Harker blinked. He swallowed. He looked up at Frost, but there was no help there. The albino stared back, unblinking, white skin round his mask beaded with sweat, eyes hard as 2 pink jewels. I am not sure I understand, Superior. I am not sure I understand, Superior. Is it not a simple question? Nipples, Harker, on men. What purpose do they serve? Have you not often wondered? Aye, Glokta sighed. They chafe and become painful in the wet. They dry out and become painful in the heat. Some women, for reasons I could never fathom, insist on fiddling with them in bed, as though we derive anything but annoyance from having them interfered with. Glokta reached towards the table, while Harker's wide eyes followed his every movement, and slid his hand slowly around the grips of the pincers. He lifted them up and examined them. the well-sharpened jaws glinting in the bright lamplight. "A man's nipples," he murmured, "are a positive hindrance to him. Do you? Aside from the unsightly scarring, I don't miss mine in the least." He grabbed the tip of Harker's nipple and dragged it roughly towards him. "Ah," squawked the one-time Inquisitor, the chair creaking as he tried desperately to twist away. "No, you think that hurts? Then I doubt you'll enjoy what's coming." And Glokta slid the open jaws of the pincers around the stretched-out flesh and squeezed them tight. Ah, please, Superior, I beg you. Your begging is worthless to me. What I need from you is answers. What became of Devoost? I swear on my life that I don't know. Not good enough." Glokta began to squeeze harder, the metal edges starting to bite into the skin. Harker gave a despairing shriek. "Wait, I took money! I admit it! I took money! I took money!" "Money." Glokta. Let the pressure release a fraction, and a drop of blood dripped from the pincers and spattered on Harker's hairy white leg. "What money? Money Devoost took from the natives? After the rebellion?" "He had me round up any that I thought might be rich, and he had them hanged along with the rest, and we requisitioned everything they had and split it between us. He kept his share in a chest in his quarters, and when he disappeared I took it. Where is this money now?" "Gone. I spent it on women and on wine, and on anything." Glokta clicked his tongue. Tut, greed and conspiracy, injustice and betrayal, robbery and murder. All the ingredients of a tale to titillate the masses. Saucy, but hardly relevant. He worked his hand around the pincers. "It is the Superior himself, not his money, that interests me. Believe me when I say that I grow tired of asking the question. What became of Devoost? I don't know. True, perhaps, but hardly the answer I need. Not good enough." Glokta squeezed his hand and the metal jaws bit cleanly through flesh and met in the middle with a gentle click. Harker bellowed and thrashed and roared in agony, blood bubbling from the red square of flesh where his nipple used to be, and running down his pale belly in dark streaks. Glokta winced at a twinge in his neck and stretched his head out until he heard it click. Strange how, with time, even the most terrible suffering of others can become tedious. Practical frost. The Inquisitor is bleeding. "If you please." "Sorry." The iron scraped as Frost dragged it from the brazier, glowing orange. Glokta could feel the heat of it even from where he was sitting. Hot iron. "It keeps no secrets. It tells no lies." No. Harker's words dissolved into a bubbling scream as Frost ground the brand into the wound, and the room filled slowly with the salty aroma of cooking meat. A smell which, to Glokta's disgust, caused his empty stomach to rumble. "How long is it since I had a good slice of meat?" He wiped a fresh sheen of sweat from his face with his free hand and worked his aching shoulders under his coat. "An ugly business that we find ourselves in. So why do I do this?" The only answer was the soft crunch as Frost slid the iron carefully back into the coals, sending up a dusting of orange sparks. Harker twisted and whimpered and shook, his weeping eyes bulging, a strand of smoke still curling up from the blackened flesh on his chest. An ugly business, of course. No doubt he deserves it, but that changes nothing. Probably he has no clue what became of Devoost, but that changes nothing either. The questions must be asked, and exactly as if he did know the answers. "Why do you insist on defying me, Harker? Could it be that you suppose that once I'm done with your nipples, I'll have run out of ideas? Is that what you're thinking? That your nipples are where I'll stop?" Harker stared at him, bubbles of spit forming and breaking on his lips. Glokta leaned closer. "Oh, no. This is only the beginning. This is before the beginning. Time opens up ahead of us in pitiless abundance. Days and weeks and months of it, if need be. Do you seriously believe that you can keep your secrets for that long? You belong to me now. To me and to this room. This cannot stop until I know what I need to know." He reached forward and gripped Harker's other nipple between thumb and forefinger. He took up the pincers and opened their bloody jaws. "How difficult can that be to understand? Magister Eider's dining chamber was fabulous to behold. Cloths of silver and crimson, gold and purple, green and blue and vivid yellow, rippled in the gentle breeze from the narrow windows. Screens of filigree marble adorned the walls. Great pots as high as a man stood in the corners. Heaps of pristine cushions were tossed about the floor, as though inviting passers-by to sprawl in comfortable decadence. Colored candles burned in tall glass jars, casting warm light into every corner, filling the air with sweet scent. At one end of the marble hall, clear water trickled gently in a star-shaped pool. There was more than a touch of the theatrical about the place, like a queen's boudoir from some Celtic legend. Magister Ida, head of the Guild of Spicers, was herself the centerpiece, the very queen of merchants. She sat at the top of the table in a pristine white gown, shimmering silk with just the slightest fascinating hint of transparency. A small fortune in jewels flashed on every inch of tanned skin. Her hair was piled up and held in place with ivory combs, excepting a few strands, curling artfully around her face. It looked very much as if she had been preparing herself all day, and not a moment was wasted. Glokta, hunched in his chair at the opposite end with a bowl of steaming soup before him, felt as if he had shuffled into the pages of a storybook. A lurid romance, set in the exotic South, with Magister Ida as the heroine, and myself the disgusting, the crippled, the black-hearted villain. How will this fable end, I wonder? So, tell me, Magister, to what do I owe this honor? I understand that you have spoken to the other members of the council. I was surprised, and just a little hurt, that you had not sought an audience with me already. I apologize if you felt left out. It seemed only fitting that I saved the most powerful until last. She looked up with an air of injured innocence, and a most consummately acted one. Powerful? Me? Verms controls the budget, issues the decrees. Visbrook commands the troops, holds the defenses. Kadia speaks for the great majority of the populace. I scarcely figure. Come now. Glokta grinned his toothless grin. You are radiant, of course, but I am not quite blinded. Verm's budget is a pittance compared to what the Spicers make. Kadia's people have been rendered almost helpless. Through your pickled friend Koska, you command more than twice the troops that Visbrook does. The only reason the Union is even interested in this thirsty rock is for the trade that your guild controls. Well, I don't like to boast. The Magister gave an artless shrug. But I suppose that I do have some passing influence in the city. You have been asking questions, I see. That's what I do. Glokta raised his spoon to his mouth, trying his best not to slurp between his remaining teeth. This soup is delicious, by the way, and one hopes not fatal. I thought you might appreciate it. You see, I have been asking questions also. The water plopped and tinkled in the pool. The fabric rustled on the walls. The silverware clicked gently against the fine pottery of their bowls. I would call that first round a draw. Carlodan Ida was the first to break the silence. I realize, of course, that you have a mission from the Archlector himself. A mission of the greatest importance. I see that you are not a man to mince your words, but you might want to tread a little more carefully. I admit my gait is awkward. A war wound, compounded by 2 years of torture. It's a wonder I got to keep the leg at all. She smiled wide, displaying 2 rows of perfect teeth. I am thoroughly tickled. But my colleagues have found you somewhat less entertaining. Worms and Visbrook have both taken a decided dislike to you. High-handed was the phrase they used, I believe, among others I had better not repeat. Glokta shrugged. I am not here to make friends, and he drained his glass of a predictably excellent wine. But friends can be useful, if nothing else. A friend is one less enemy. Devust insisted on upsetting everyone, and the results have not been happy. Devust did not enjoy the support of the closed council. True. But no document will stop a knife thrust. Is that a threat? Carlodan Ida laughed. It was an easy, open, friendly laugh. It was hard to believe that anyone who made such a sound could be a traitor, or a threat, or anything other than a perfectly charming host. And yet I am not entirely convinced. That is advice. Advice born of bitter experience. I would prefer it if you did not disappear quite yet. Really, I had no idea I was such a winning dinner guest. You are terse, confrontational, slightly frightening, and impose severe restrictions on the menu. But the fact is, you are more used to me here than, and she waved her hand, wherever Devust went to. Would you care for more wine? Of course. She got up from her chair and swept towards him, feet patting on the cool marble like a dancer's. Bare feet, in the Celtic fashion. The breeze stirred the flowing garments around her body as she leaned forwards to fill Glokta's glass, wafted her rich scent in his face. Just the sort of woman my mother would have wanted me to marry, beautiful, clever, and oh so very rich. Just the sort of woman I would have wanted to marry, for that matter, when I was younger. When I was a different man. The flickering candlelight shone on her hair, flashed on the jewels around her long neck, glowed through the wine as it sloshed from the neck of the bottle. Does she try and charm me merely because I hold the writ of the closed council, nothing more than good business, to be on good terms with the powerful? Or does she hope to fool me and distract me and lure me away from the unpleasant truth? Her eyes met his briefly, and she gave a tiny, knowing smile and looked back to his glass. Am I to be her little urchin boy, dirty face pressed up against the baker's window, mouth watering for the sweetmeats I know I can never afford? I think not. Where did Davust go to? Magister Eider paused for a moment, then carefully set down the bottle. She slid into the nearest chair, put her elbows on the table, her chin on her hands, and held Glokta's eye. I suspect that he was killed by a traitor in the city, probably an agent of the Gurkish. At the risk of telling you what you already know, Davust suspected there was a conspiracy afoot within the city's ruling council. He confided as much to me shortly before his disappearance. Did he indeed? A conspiracy within the ruling council? Glokta shook his head in mock horror. Is such a thing possible? Let us be honest with each other, superior. I want what you want. We in the Guild of Spicers have invested far too much time and money in this city to see it fall to the Gurkish, and you seem to offer a better chance of holding on to it than those idiots, Worms, and Vispra. If there is a traitor within our walls, I want him found, him or her. Magister Eider raised one delicate eyebrow. It cannot have escaped your notice that I am the only woman on the council. It has not. Glokta slurped noisily from his spoon. But forgive me if I don't discount you quite yet. It will require more than good soup and pleasant conversation to convince me of anyone's innocence, although it's a damn sight more than anyone else has offered me. Magister Eider smiled as she raised her glass. Then how can I convince you? Honestly? I need money. Money. It always comes back to that. Getting money out of my guild is like trying to dig up water in the desert, tiring, dirty, and almost always a waste of time. Somewhat like asking questions of Inquisitor Harker. How much were you thinking of? We could begin with, say, 100,000 marks. Eider did not actually choke on her wine. More of a gentle gurgle. She set her glass down carefully, quietly cleared her throat, dabbed at her mouth with the corner of a cloth, then looked up at him, eyebrows raised. You very well know that no such amount will be forthcoming. I'll settle for whatever you can give me for now. We'll see. Are your ambitions limited to a mere 100,000 marks, or is there anything else I can do for you? Actually, there is. I need the merchants out of the temple. Eider rubbed gently at her own temples, as though Glokta's demands were giving her a headache. He wants the merchants out, she murmured. It was necessary to secure Kadia's support. With him against us, we cannot hope to hold the city for long. With him against us, we cannot hope to hold the city for long. I've been telling those arrogant fools the same thing for years, but stamping on the natives has become quite the popular pastime nonetheless. Very well. When do you want them out? Tomorrow, at the latest. And they call you high-handed. She shook her head. Very well. By tomorrow evening, I could well be the most unpopular magister in living memory, if I still have my post at all, but I'll try and sell it to the guild. Glokta grinned. I feel confident that you could sell anything. You're a tough negotiator, superior. If you ever get tired of asking questions, I have no doubt you've a bright future as a merchant. A merchant? Oh, I'm not that ruthless. Glokta placed his spoon in the empty bowl and licked at his gums. I mean, no disrespect. But how does a woman come to head the most powerful guild in the Union? Eider paused, as though wondering whether to answer or not, or judging how much truth to tell when she does. She looked down at her glass, turned the stem slowly round and round. My husband was magister before me. When we married, I was 22 years old. He was near 60. My father owed him a great deal of money and offered my hand as payment for the debt. Ah, so we all have our sufferings. Her lip twisted in a faint scowl. My husband always had a good nose for a bargain. His health began to decline soon after we married, and I took a more and more active role in the management of his affairs and those of the guild. By the time he died, I was magister in all but name, and my colleagues were sensible enough to formalize the arrangement. The Spicers have always been more concerned for profit than propriety. Her eyes flicked up to look at Glokta. I mean no disrespect, but how does a war hero come to be a torturer? It was his turn to pause. A good question. How did that happen? There are precious few opportunities for cripples. Ida nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Glokta's face. That must have been hard. To come back after all that time in the darkness, and to find that your friends had no use for you. To see in their faces only guilt and pity and disgust. To find yourself alone. Glokta's eyelid was twitching, and he rubbed at it gently. He had never discussed such things with anyone before, and now here I am, discussing them with a stranger. There can be no doubt that I'm a tragic figure. I used to be a shit of a man, now I'm a husk of one. Take your pick. I imagine it makes you sick to be treated that way. Very sick, and very angry, if only you knew. It still seems a strange decision, though, for the tortured to turn torturer. On the contrary, nothing could be more natural. In my experience, people do as they are done to. You were sold by your father and bought by your husband, and yet you choose to buy and sell. Ida frowned. Something for her to think about, perhaps. I would have thought your pain would give you empathy. Empathy? What's that? Glokta winced as he rubbed at his aching leg. It's a sad fact, but pain only makes you sorry for yourself. Chapter 8. Campfire Politics. Logen shifted uncomfortably in his saddle and squinted up at the few birds circling around over the great flat plain. Damn, but his arse hurt. His thighs were sore, his nose was all full of the smell of horse. Couldn't find a comfortable position to put his fruits in. Always squashed, however often he jammed his hand down inside his belt to move him. A damn uncomfortable journey this was turning out to be, in all sorts of ways. He used to talk on the road, back in the north. When he was a boy, he'd talk to his father. When he was a young man, he'd talk to his friends. When he'd followed Bethad, he'd talk to him, all the day long, for they'd been close back then, like brothers almost. Talk took your mind off the blisters on your feet, or the hunger in your belly, or the endless bloody cold, or who'd got killed yesterday. Logen used to laugh at the dogmen's stories while they slogged through the snow. He used to puzzle over tactics with Three Trees while they rode through the mud. He used to argue with Black Dow while they waded through bogs, and no subject was ever too small. He'd even traded a joke or two with Harding Grim in his time, and there weren't too many who could say that. He sighed to himself. A long, painful sigh that caught at the back of his throat. Good times, no doubt, but far behind him now, in the sunny valleys of the past. Those boys were all gone back to the mud. All silent, forever. Worse yet, they'd left Logen out in the middle of nowhere with this lot. The great Jezal Dan Luther wasn't interested in anyone's stories except his own. He sat stiff, upright, and aloof the whole time, chin held high, displaying his arrogance, and his superiority, and his contempt for everything like a young man might show off his first sword, long before he learned that it was nothing to be proud of. Bayaz had no interest in tactics. When he spoke at all, he barked in single words and yeses and nos, frowning out across the endless grass like a man who's made a bad mistake and can't see his way clear of it. His apprentice, too, seemed changed since they left Adua. Quiet, hard, watchful. Brother Longfoot was away across the plain, scouting out the route. Probably best that way. No one else had any talk at all. The navigator, Logen had to admit, had far too much. Pharaoh rode some distance away from the rest of this friendly gathering, her shoulders hunched, her brows drawn down in a constant scowl. The long scar on her cheek puckered up an angry gray, doing her best to make the others look like a sack of usakavas. Laughs. She leaned forwards into the wind, pushing at it, as if she hoped to hurt it with her face. More fun to trade jokes with the plague than with her, Logen reckoned. And that was the merry band. His shoulders slumped. How long until we get to the edge of the world? He asked Bayaz, without much hope. Some way yet, growled the Magus through barely open teeth. So Logen rode on, tired and sore, and bored, and watched those few birds gliding slowly over the endless plain. Nice, big, fat birds. He licked his lips. "We could do with some meat," he muttered. "Hadn't had fresh meat in a good long time now. Not since they left Chalcis." Logen rubbed his stomach. The fatty softness from his time in the city was already tightening. Nice bit of meat. Pharaoh frowned over at him, then up at the few birds circling above. She shrugged her bow off her shoulder. Chuckled Logen. "Good luck." He watched her slide an arrow smoothly out from her quiver. Futile gesture. Even Harding Grim could never have made that shot, and he was the best man Logen had ever seen with a bow. He watched Pharaoh knock her shaft to the curved wood, back arched, yellow eyes fixed on the gliding shapes overhead. "You'll never bag one of those, not in 1,000 years of trying." She pulled back the string. "Waste of a shaft," he shouted. "You've got to be realistic about these things." Probably the arrow would drop back down and stab him in the face, or stick his horse through the neck, so it died and fell over and crushed him under it. A fitting end to this nightmare of a journey. A moment later, one of the birds tumbled down into the grass. Pharaoh's arrow stuck right through it. "No," he whispered, gawping open-mouthed at her as she bent the bow again. Another arrow sailed up into the gray sky. Another bird flopped to the earth, just beside the first. Logen stared at it, disbelieving. "No, don't tell me you haven't seen stranger things," said Bayaz. "A man who talks to spirits, who travels with magi, the most feared man in all the north." Logen pulled his horse up and slithered down from the saddle. He walked through the long grass, bent down on wobbly, aching legs, and picked up one of the birds. The shaft had stuck it right through the center of the breast. If Logen had stabbed it with the arrow at a distance of a foot, he could hardly have done it more neatly. "That's wrong." Bayaz grinned down, hands crossed on the saddle before him. "In ancient days, before history, so the legends say, our world and the other side were joined. One world. Demons walked the land, free to do as they pleased. Chaos, beyond dreaming. They bred with humans, and their offspring were half-breeds, part man, part demon, devil bloods, monsters. One among them took the name Ooze. He delivered humanity from the tyranny of devils, and the fury of his battle with them shaped the land. He split the world above from the world below, and he sealed the gates between. To prevent such terror ever coming again, he pronounced the first law. It is forbidden to touch the other side direct, or to speak with devils. Logen watched the others watch Pharaoh, Luther and Quai, both frowning at this uncanny display of archery. She leaned right back in her saddle, bowstring drawn as tight as it would go, glittering point of the next shaft held perfectly steady, still managing to nudge her mount this way and that with her heels. Logen could scarcely make a horse do what he wanted with the reins in his hands, but he failed to see what Bayaz' crazy story had to do with it. Devils and so on. The first law, Logen waved his hand. So what? From the start, the first law was filled with contradictions. All magic comes from the other side, falling upon the land as the light falls from the sun. Eus himself was part devil, and so were his son Juvens, Canidius, Glustrad, and others beside. Their blood brought them gifts and curses, power and long life, and strength or sight beyond the limits of simple men. Their blood passed on into their children, growing ever thinner, into their children's children, and so on through the long centuries. The gifts skipped one generation, then another, then came but rarely. The devil blood grew thin and died out. It is rare indeed now, when our world and the world below have drifted so far apart, to see those gifts made flesh. We truly are privileged to witness it. Logen raised his eyebrows. Half devil, much less than half, my friend. Bayaz chuckled. Ois himself was half, and his power threw up the mountains and gouged out the seas. Half could strike a horror and a desire into your blood, to stop your heart. Half could blind you to look upon. Not half, no more than a fraction. But in her there is a trace of the other side. The other side, eh? Logen looked down at the dead bird in his hand. So if I was to touch her, would I break the first law? Bayaz chuckled. Now that is a sharp question. You always surprise me, Master Nine Fingers. I wonder what Eus would say to it. The magus pursed his lips. I think I could find it in myself to forgive you. She, however, and Bayaz nodded his bald head at Pharaoh, would most likely cut your hand off. Logen lay on his belly, peering through the tall grass into a gentle valley with a shallow brook in its bottom. There was a huddle of buildings on the side nearest them, or the shells of buildings. No roofs left, nothing but the tumble-down walls, mostly no more than waist-high. The fallen stones from them scattered across the valley's slopes, in amongst the waving grass. It could have been a scene out of the north. Lots of villages abandoned there since the wars. People driven out, dragged out, burned out. Logen had watched it happen, often. He'd joined in more than once. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't proud of much from those times, or any other. Come to think of it, not a lot left to live in, whispered Luther. Pharaoh scowled at him. Plenty left to hide behind. Evening was coming on. The sun had dropped low on the horizon and rilled the broken village up with shadows. There was no sign of anyone down there, no sounds beyond the giggling water, the slow wind slithering through the grass. No sign of anyone, but Pharaoh was right. No sign didn't necessarily mean no danger. You had best go down there and take a look, murmured Longfoot. I best? Logen glanced sideways at him. You're staying here then. I have no talent for fights, you are well aware of that. Ha, muttered Logen. No talent for the sorting of fights. Plenty for the finding of though. Finding things is what I do. I'm here to navigate. Maybe you could find me a decent meal and a bed to sleep in, snapped Luther, in his whining Union accent. Pharaoh sucked her teeth with disgust. Someone's got to go, she growled, sliding over the lip of the slope on her belly. I'll take the left. No one else moved. Us too, Logen grunted at Luther. Me? Who else? 3's a good number. Let's go, and let's keep it stealthy. Luther peered through the grass into the valley, licked his lips, rubbed his palms together. Nervous. Logen could tell. Nervous but proud at the same time, like an untried boy before a battle, trying to show he's not scared by sticking his chin out. Logen wasn't fooled. He'd seen it all 100 times before. You planning to wait for the morning, he grunted. Just keep your mind on your own shortcomings, Northmen, hissed Luther, as he started to wriggle forward down the slope. You've enough of them. The rowels of his big, shiny spurs rattled loud as he dragged himself over the edge, clumsy and unpracticed, his arse sticking up in the air. Logen grabbed hold of his coat before he got more than a stride. You're not leaving those on, are you? You? What? Those fucking spurs, Stealthy, I said. You might as well hang a bell off your cock. Luther scowled as he sat up to pull them off. Stay down, hissed Logen, pushing him back into the grass on his back. You want to get us killed. Get off me. Logen shoved him down again, then stabbed at him with his finger to make sure he got the point. I'm not dying over your fucking spurs, and that's a fact. If you can't keep quiet, you can stay here with the navigator. He glowered over at Longfoot. Maybe you both can navigate your way into the village once we've made sure it's safe. He shook his head and crawled down the slope after Pharaoh. She was already halfway to the brook, rolling and slithering over the crumbled walls, sneaking across the spaces in between them, keeping low, hand on the grip of her curved sword, quick and silent as the wind over the plain. Impressive, no doubt. But Logen was nobody's fool when it came to a spot of sneaking. He'd been known for it when he was younger. Lost count of the number of Shanka. The number of men had come up behind. The first you'll hear of the bloody 9 is the blood hissing out of your neck. That used to be the rumor. Say one thing for Logen Ninefingers. Say that he's stealthy. He flowed up to the first wall, slid one leg over it, silent as a mouse. He lifted himself up. Smooth as butter, keeping quiet, keeping low. His back foot caught on a set of loose stones, dragged them scraping with him. He grabbed at them, fumbled them, knocked over even more with his elbow, and they clattered down loud around him. He stumbled onto his weak ankle, twisted it, squawked with pain, fell over and rolled through a patch of thistles. Shit, he grunted, struggling up, one hand clutching at the hilt of his sword, all tangled up with his coat. Good thing he hadn't had it out, or he could have stuck himself through with it. Happened to a friend of his. So busy shouting that he tripped on a tree root and cut a big piece out of his head on his own axe. back to the mud double time. He crouched among the fallen stones, waiting for someone to jump him. No one came. Just the wind breathing through the gaps in the old walls, the water chuckling away in the brook. He crept along beside a heap of rough stones, through an old doorway, slithered over a slumping wall, limping and gasping on his bad foot, scarcely making any effort to stay quiet any longer. There was no one there. He'd known it as soon as he fell. No way they could have missed that sorry performance. The dogman would most likely have been weeping right about now, had he been alive. He waved up at the ridge, and a moment later he saw Longfoot stand up and wave as well. "No one here," he muttered to himself. "Just as well," hissed Pharaoh's voice, not more than a stride or two behind. "You got a new way of scouting, Pink. Make so much noise that they come to you. Out of practice," grunted Logen. "Still, no harm done. No one here, there was." She was standing in the shell of one of the ruined buildings, frowning down at the ground. A burned patch in the grass, a few stones set around it. "A campfire, no more'n a day or two old," muttered Logen, poking at the ashes with a finger. Luther walked up behind them. No one here after all. He had a smug, sucked-in look on his face, like he'd somehow been right about something all along. Logen didn't see what. "Lucky for you there isn't, or we might be stitching you together right about now." "I'd be stitching the fucking pair of you," hissed Pharaoh. "I ought to stitch your useless pink heads together. You're both as worthless as a bag of sand in the desert. There's tracks over there. Horses. More than one cart. Merchants, maybe?" asked Logen hopefully. He and Pharaoh looked at each other for a moment. "Might be better if we stay off the track from now on. Too slow." Bayaz had made it down into the village now. Kay and Longfoot weren't far behind with the cart and the horses. Far too slow. "We stick to the track. We'll see anyone coming in good time out here. Plenty of time." Luther didn't look convinced. "If we see them, they'll see us." "What then?" "Then," Bayaz raised an eyebrow. "Then we have the famous Captain Luther to protect us." He looked round at the ruined village. "Running water and shelter of a kind. Seems like a good place to camp." "Good enough," muttered Logen, already rooting through the cart for logs to start a fire of their own. "I'm hungry. What happened to those birds?" Logen sat and watched the others eat over the rim of his pot. Pharaoh squatted at the very edge of the shifting light from the campfire, hunched over, shadowy face almost stuck right into her bowl, staring around suspiciously and shoving food in with her fingers, like she was worried it might be snatched away any moment. Luther was less enthusiastic. He was nibbling daintily at a wing with his bared front teeth, as though touching it with his lips might poison him. Discarded morsels lined up carefully along the side of his platter. Bayaz chewed away with some relish, his beard glistening with gravy. "It's good," he muttered around a mouthful. "You might want to consider cookery as a career, Master Ninefingers, if you should ever grow tired of—" He waved his spoon. "Whatever it is you do." "Ha!" said Logen. "In the north everyone took their turn at the fire, and it was reckoned an honor to do it. A good cook was almost as valued as a good fighter. Not here. These were a sorry crowd when it came to minding the pot. Bayaz could just about get his tea boiled, and that was as far as he went. Quai could get a biscuit out of the box on a good day." Logen doubted whether Luther would even have known which way up the pot went. As for Pharaoh, she seemed to despise the whole notion of cooking. Logen reckoned she was used to eating her food raw, perhaps while it was still alive. In the north, after a hard day on the trail, when the men gathered around the long fires to eat, there was a strict order to who sat where. The chief would go at the top, with his sons and the named men of the clan around him. Next came the carls, in order of fame. Thralls were lucky to get their own small fires further out. Men would always have their place, and only change it when their chief offered, out of respect for some great service they'd done him, or for showing rare good bones in a fight. Sitting out of place could earn you a kicking, or a killing even. Where you sat round the fire was where you stood in life, more or less. It was different out here on the plains, but Logen could still see a pattern in who sat where, and it was far from a happy one. He and Bayaz were close enough to the fire, but the others were further than comfort would have put them, drawn close by the wind, and the cold, and the damp night, pushed further out by each other. He glanced over at Luther, sneering down into his bowl as though it was full of piss. No respect. He glanced over at Pharaoh. staring yellow knives at him through narrowed eyes. No trust, he shook his head sadly. Without trust and respect, the group would fall apart in a fight like walls without mortar. Still, Logen had won over tougher audiences in his time. Three Trees, Tul Duru, Black Dow, Harding Grim. He'd fought each one in single combat, and beaten them all, spared each man's life, and left him bound to follow. Each one had tried their best to kill him, and with good reasons too. But in the end, Logen had earned their trust, and their respect, and their friendship even. Small gestures and a lot of time, that was how he'd done it. Patience is the chief of virtues, his father used to say, and you won't cross the mountains in a day. Time might be against them, but there was nothing to be gained by rushing. You have to be realistic about these things. Logen uncrossed his stiff legs, took hold of the water skin and got up, walked slowly over to where Pharaoh was sitting. Her eyes followed him all the way across. She was a strange one, no doubt, and not just the looks of her, though the dead knew her looks were strange enough. She seemed hard and sharp and cold as a new sword, ruthless as any man that Logen could think of. You would have thought she wouldn't throw a log to save a drowning man, but she'd done more than that to save him, and more than once. Out of all of them, she was the one he'd trust first and furthest, so he squatted down and held the skin out to her, its bulbous shadow flickering and shifting on the rough wall behind her. She frowned at it for a moment, then frowned up at Logen. Then she snatched it off him and bent back over her pot, half turning her bony shoulders on him. Not a word of thanks, or a gesture even, but he didn't mind. You won't cross the mountains in a day, after all. He dropped down again beside the fire, watched the flames dancing, casting shifting light across the grim faces of the group. "Anyone know any stories?" he asked, hopefully. Quay sucked at his teeth. Luthar curled his lip at Logen across the fire. Pharaoh gave no sign that she had even heard. Hardly an encouraging start. "Not any?" No reply. "What did you have it in mind to hear about? A romance? A comedy? A tale of bravery against the odds?" "This place," cut in Luthar. "The old empire. If it was such a great nation, how did it come to this?" He jerked his head over at the crumbling walls, and what they all knew lay beyond. The miles and miles of nothing. A wasteland? Bayaz sighed. "I could tell that tale, but we are lucky enough to have a native of the old empire with us on our little trip, and a keen student of history to boot. Master Quay?" The apprentice looked up lazily from the fire. "Would you care to enlighten us? How did the empire, once the glittering center of the world, come to this pass?" "That story is long in the telling," murmured the apprentice. "Shall I start from the beginning? Where else should a man ever start?" Quay shrugged his bony shoulders and began to speak. "Almighty Uz, vanquisher of demons, closer of gates, father of the world, had 4 sons, and to each he gave a gift. To his eldest, Juvens, he gave the talent of high art, the skill to change the world with magic, tempered by knowledge. To his second son, Canidius, went the gift of making, of shaping stone and metal to his own purposes. To his third son, Badesh, Uz gave the skill of speaking with spirits, and of making them do his bidding." Quay gave a wide yawn, smacked his lips and blinked at the fire. "So were born the 3 pure disciplines of magic. I thought he had 4 sons, grumbled Luthar. Quiet eyes slid sideways. "So he did, and therein lies the root of the empire's destruction. Glustrad was the youngest son. To him should have gone the gift of communing with the other side, the secrets of summoning devils from the world below and binding them to one's will. But such things were forbidden by the first law, and so Uz gave nothing to his youngest son but his blessing, and we all know what those are worth. He taught the other 3 their share of his secrets and left, ordering his sons to bring order to the world." "Order!" Luthar tossed his platter down on the grass beside him, and glanced disdainfully round at the shadowy ruins. "They didn't get far. At first they did." Juven set about his purpose with a will, and bent all his power and all his wisdom to it. He found a people that pleased him, living beside the Aos, and favored them with laws and learning, government and science. He gave to them the skills to conquer their neighbors, and made of their chief an emperor. Son followed father, year followed year, and the nation grew and prospered. The lands of the empire stretched as far as Isparta in the south, Ancanus in the north, the very shores of the Circle Sea to the east, and beyond. Emperor followed emperor. But always Juven's was their guiding, advising, shaping all things according to his grand design. All was civilized, all was peaceful, all was peaceful, all was content. Almost all, muttered Bayaz, poking at the guttering fire with a stick. Quay gave a smirk. We have forgotten Glukta just as his father did, the ignored son, the shunned son, the cheated son. He begged all three brothers for a share of their secrets, but they were jealous of their gifts, and all three refused him. He looked upon what Juven's had achieved, and was bitter beyond words. He found dark places in the world, and in secret he studied those sciences forbidden by the first law. He found dark places in the world, and he touched the other side. He found dark places, and he spoke in the tongue of devils, and he heard their voices answer him. Quiet. Voice dropped down to a whisper. And the voices told Glukta where to dig. Very good, Master Quay, cut in Bayaz sternly. Your grip on the history seems much improved. Let us not tarry on the details, however. We can leave Glukta's diggings for another day. Of course, murmured Quay, his dark eyes glittering in the firelight, his gaunt face full of gloomy hollows. You know best, Master. Glukta laid plans. He watched from the shadows. He garnered secrets. He flattered, and he threatened, and he lied. It did not take him long to turn the weak-willed to his purposes, and the strong-willed against each other, for he was cunning and charming and fair to look upon. He heard the voices always now, from the world below. They suggested that he sow discord everywhere, and he listened. They urged him to eat the flesh of men and steal their power, and he did so. They commanded him to seek out those devil-bloods that remained in our world, spurned, hated, exiled, and make from them an army, and he obeyed. Something touched Logen's shoulder from behind, and he near jumped in the air. Pharaoh was standing over him, the water skin held out in her hand. Thanks, he growled as he took it from her, pretending that his heart wasn't knocking at his ribs. He took a quick swig and banged the stopper in with his palm, then put it down beside him. When he looked up, Pharaoh hadn't moved. She stood there above him, looking down at the dancing flames. Logen shuffled up a step, making room. Pharaoh scowled, sucked her teeth, kicked at the ground, then slowly squatted down on her haunches, making sure to leave plenty of space between them. She held her hands out to the fire and bared her shining teeth at it. Cold over there. Logen nodded. These walls don't keep the wind off much. No. Her eyes swept across the group and found Quay. Don't stop for me, she snapped. The apprentice grinned. Strange and sinister was the host that Glukta gathered. He waited for Juven's to leave the empire. Then he crept into the capital at Alcus and set his well-laid schemes in motion. It seemed as if a madness swept the city. Son fought with father, wife with husband, neighbor with neighbor. The emperor was cut down on the steps of his palace by his own sons. And then, maddened with greed and envy, they turned upon each other. Glukta's twisted army had slithered into the sewers beneath the city and rose up, turning the streets into charnel pits, the squares into slaughter yards. Some among them could take forms, stealing the faces of others. Bayaz shook his head. Taking forms, a dread and insidious trick. Logen remembered a woman, in the cold darkness, who had spoken with the voice of his dead wife, and he frowned and hunched his shoulders. A dread trick indeed, said Quay, his sickly grin growing even wider. For who can be trusted if one cannot trust one's own eyes, one's own ears, to tell friend from foe? But worse was to come. Glukta summoned demons from the other side, bound them to his will, and sent them to destroy those who might resist him. Summoning and sending, hissed Bayaz. Cursed disciplines, dire risks, terrible breaches of the first law. But Glukta recognized no law beyond his own strength. Soon he sat in the emperor's throne room, upon a pile of skulls, sucking the flesh of men as a baby sucks milk, basking in his awful victory. The empire descended into chaos, the very slightest taste of the chaos of ancient days, before the coming of Uz, when our world and the world below were one. A gust of wind sighed through the chinks in the ancient stonework around them. and Logen shivered and pulled his blanket tight around him. Damn's story was making him nervous, stealing faces and sending devils and eating men. But Quai did not stop. When he found out what Glokta had done, Juven's fury was terrible, and he sought the aid of his brothers. Canedius would not come. He stayed sealed in his house, tinkering with his machines, caring nothing for the world outside. Juvens and Bidesh raised an army without him, and they fought a war against their brother. A terrible war, muttered Bayaz, with terrible weapons and terrible casualties. The fighting spread across the continent from one end to the other, and drew in every petty rivalry, and gave birth to a host of feuds and crimes and vengeances, whose consequences still poison the world today. But in the end, Juvens was victorious. Glokta was besieged in Orcus, his changelings unmasked, his army scattered. Now, in his most desperate moment, the voices from the world below whispered to him a plan. "Open a gate to the other side," they said. "Pick the locks and crack the seals, and throw wide the doors that your father made. Break the first law one last time," they said, "and let us back into the world. And you will never again be ignored, be shunned, be cheated." The first of the Magi nodded slowly to himself. But he was cheated once more. Poor fool. The creatures of the other side are made of lies. To deal with them is to grasp the most awful peril. Glokta made ready his rituals, but in his haste he made some small mistake. Only a grain of salt out of place, perhaps, but the results were horrible indeed. The great power that Glokta had gathered, strong enough to tear a hole in the fabric of the world, was released without form or reason. Glokta destroyed himself. Orcus, great and beautiful capital of the empire, was laid waste, the land around it forever poisoned. No one ventures within miles of the place now. The city is a shattered graveyard, a blasted ruin, a fitting monument to the folly and the pride of Glokta and his brothers. The apprentice glanced up at Bayaz. "Do I speak the truth, master?" "You do," murmured the magus. "You do," murmured the magus. "I know. I saw it." A young fool with a full and lustrous head of hair. He ran a hand over his bald scalp. A young fool who was as ignorant of magic and wisdom and the ways of power as you are now, Master Quai. The apprentice inclined his head. "I live only to learn. And in that regard, you seem much improved. How did you like that tale, Master Ninefingers?" Logen puffed out his cheeks. "I'd been hoping for something with a few more laughs, but I guess I'll take what's offered." "A pack of nonsense, if you ask me," sneered Luther. "Ha!" snorted Bayaz. "How fortunate for us that no one did. Perhaps you ought to get the pots washed, Captain, before it gets too late." Me. One of us caught the food and one of us cooked it. One of us has entertained the group with a tale. You are the only one among us who has as yet contributed nothing. Apart from you. Oh, I am far too old to be sloshing around in streams at this time of night. Bayaz's face grew hard. A great man must first learn humility. The pots await. Luther opened his mouth to speak, thought better of it, pushed himself angrily up from his place and threw his blanket down in the grass. Damn pots! He cursed as he snatched them up from around the fire and stomped off towards the brook. Pharaoh watched him go, a strange expression on her face that might even have been her version of a smile. She looked back at the fire and licked her lips. Logen pulled the stopper from the water skin and held it out to her. She grunted, snatched it from his hand, took a quick swallow. While she was wiping her mouth on her sleeve, she glanced sideways at him and frowned. "What? Nothing," he said quickly, looking away and holding up his empty palms. "Nothing at all." He was smiling on the inside, though. Small gestures and time. That was how he'd get it done. Chapter 9. Small Crimes. "Cold, eh, Colonel West?" "Yes, Your Highness. Winter is nearly upon us. There had been a kind of snow in the night, a cold, wet sleet that covered everything in icy moisture. Now, in the pale morning, the whole world seemed half-frozen. The hooves of their horses crunched and slurped in the half-frozen mud. Water dripped sadly from the half-frozen trees. West was no exception. His breath smoked from his runny nose. The tips of his ears tingled unpleasantly, numb from the cold. Prince Ladisla hardly seemed to notice, but then he was swathed in an enormous coat, hat and mittens of shining black fur. No doubt several 100 marks worth of it. He grinned over. The men seemed good and fit, though, in spite of it all. West could scarcely believe his ears. The regiment of the King's Own that had been placed under Ladislaw's command seemed happy enough, it was true. Their wide tents were pitched in orderly rows in the middle of the camp, cooking fires in front, horses tethered nearby in good order. The position of the levies, who made up a good 3/4 of their strength, was less happy. Many were shamefully ill-prepared, men with no training or no weapons, some who were plainly too ill or too old for marching, let alone for battle. Some had little more than the clothes they stood up in, and those were in a wow. Some had little more than the clothes they stood up in, and those were in a West had seen men huddled together under trees for warmth, nothing but half a blanket to keep the rain off. It was a disgrace. The King's Own are well provided for, but I'm concerned about the situation of some of the levies Yes, said Ladisla, talking over him precisely as if he had not spoken. Good and fit. Chomping at the bit. Must be the fire in their bellies keeps them warm, eh, West? Can't wait to get at the enemy. Damn shame we have to wait here, kicking our heels behind this damn river. West bit his lip. Prince Ladisla's incredible powers of self-deception were becoming more frustrating with every passing day. His Highness had fixed upon the idea of being a great and famous general, with a matchless force of fighting men under his command, of winning a famous victory, and being celebrated as a hero back in Adua. Rather than exerting a single particle of effort to make it happen, however, he behaved as if it already had, utterly regardless of the truth. Nothing which was distasteful, or displeasing, or at odds with his cock-eyed notions could be permitted to be noticed. Meanwhile, the dandies on his staff, without a month's military experience between them, congratulated him on his fine judgment, slapped each other on the back, and agreed with his every utterance, no matter how ludicrous, never to want for anything, or work for anything, or show the tiniest grain of self-discipline in a whole life must give a man a strange outlook on the world, West supposed. And here was the proof, riding along beside him, smiling away as though the care of 10,000 men was a light responsibility. The Crown Prince and the real world, as Lord Marshal Burr had observed, were entire strangers to one another. Cold, Ladisla murmured. Not much like the deserts of Gurkle now. Eh, Colonel West? No, Your Highness. But some things are the same, eh? I'm speaking of war, West. War in general. The same everywhere. The courage, the honor, the glory. You fought with Colonel Glokta, didn't you? Yes, Your Highness, I did. I used to love to hear stories of that man's exploits. One of my heroes, when I was young, riding round the enemy, harassing his lines of communication, falling on the baggage train and whatnot. The prince's riding crop rode around, harassed, and fell on imaginary baggage in the air before him. Capital! And I suppose you saw it all. Some of it, Your Highness, yes. He had seen a great deal of saddle-soreness, sunburn, looting, drunkenness, and vainglorious showing off. Colonel Glokta, I swear, we could do with some of that dash here, eh, West? Some of that vim, that vigor. Shame that he's dead. West looked up. He isn't dead, Your Highness. He isn't. He was captured by the Gurkish, and then returned to the Union when the war ended. Here he joined the Inquisition. The Inquisition? The prince looked horrified. Why on earth would a man give up the soldiering life for that? West groped for words, but then thought better of it. I cannot imagine, Your Highness, joined the Inquisition. Well, I never... They rode in silence for a moment. Gradually, the prince's smile returned. But we were talking of the honor of war, were we not? West grimaced. We were, Your Highness. First through the breach at Ulrioch, weren't you? First through the breach, I heard. There's honor for you, eh? There's glory, isn't it? That must have been quite an experience, eh, Colonel? Quite an experience, struggling through a mass of broken stones and timbers, littered with twisted corpses. half blind with the smoke, half choking on the dust, shrieks and wails and the clashing of metal coming at him from all around, hardly able to breathe for fear. Men pressing in on all sides, groaning, shoving, stumbling, yelling, running with blood and sweat, black with grime and soot, half-seen faces twisted with pain and fury. Devils in hell. West remembered screaming forward. West remembered screaming forward over and over until his throat was raw, even though he had no idea which way forward was. He remembered stabbing someone with his sword, friend or enemy, he did not know, then or now. He remembered falling and cutting his head on a rock, tearing his jacket on a broken timber. Moments, fragments, as if from a story he once heard someone else telling. West pulled his coat tight around his chilly shoulders, wishing it was thicker. "Quite an experience, Your Highness. Damn shame that bloody Bethad won't be coming this way." Prince Ladislas slashed petulantly at the air with his riding crop. "Little better than damn guard duty. Does Burr take me for a fool, eh, West? Does he?" West took a deep breath. "I couldn't possibly say, Your Highness." The prince's fickle mind had already moved off. "What about those pets of yours? Those Northmen? The ones with the comical names? What's he called, that dirty fellow? Wolfman, is it? Dogman! 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 That's it! Capital!" The prince chuckled to himself. "And that other one? Biggest damn fellow I ever saw! Excellent! What are they up to?" "I sent them scouting north of the river, Your Highness. West rather wished he was with them. The enemy are probably far away. But if they aren't, we need to know about it." "Oh, of course we do." "Excellent idea, so that we can prepare to attack." A timely withdrawal and a fast messenger to Marshal Burr was more what West had in mind, but there was no point in saying so. Ladislas' whole notion of war was of ordering a glorious charge, then retiring to bed. Strategy and retreat were not words in his vocabulary. "Yes," the prince was muttering to himself, eyes fixed intently on the trees beyond the river. "Prepare an attack and sweep them back across the border." The border was 100 leagues away. West seized his moment. "Your Highness, if I may, there is a great deal for me to do." It was no lie. The camp had been organized or disorganized, without a thought for convenience or defense. An unruly maze of ramshackle canvas in a great clearing near the river, where the ground was too soft and had soon been turned into a morass of sticky mud by the supply carts. At first there had been no latrines. Then they had been dug too shallow and much too close to the camp, not far from where the provisions were being stored. Provisions which, incidentally, had been badly packed, inadequately prepared, and were already close to spoiling, attracting every rat in Angland. If it had not been for the cold, West did not doubt that the camp would already have been riddled with disease. Prince Ladislas waved his hand. "Of course, a great deal to do. You can tell me more of your stories tomorrow, eh, West? About Colonel Glokta and so forth." "Damn shame he's dead," he shouted over his shoulder as he cantered off towards his enormous purple tent, high up on the hill above the stink and confusion. West turned his mount with some relief and urged it down the slope into the camp. He passed men tottering through the half-frozen sludge, shivering, breath steaming, hands wrapped in dirty rags. He passed men sitting in sorry groups before their patched tents. No two dressed the same, as close to meager fires as they dared, fiddling with cooking pots, playing miserable games of damp cards, drinking, and staring into the cold air. The better-trained levies had gone with Polder and Croy to seek out the enemy. Ladislas had been left with the rump, those too weak to march well, too poorly equipped to fight well, too broken even to do nothing with any conviction. Men who might never have left their homes in all their lives, forced to cross the sea to a land they knew nothing of, to fight an enemy they had no quarrel with, for reasons they did not understand. Some few of them might have felt some trace of patriotic fervor, some swell of manly pride when they left. But by now the hard marching, the bad food and the cold weather had truly worn, starved and frozen all enthusiasm out of them. Prince Ladislas was scarcely the inspirational leader to put it back, had he even been making the slightest effort to do so. West looked down at those grim, tired, pinched faces as he rode past, and they stared back, beaten already. All they wanted was to go home, and West could hardly blame them. So did he. Colonel West. There was a big man grinning over at him. A man with a thick beard, wearing the uniform of an officer in the king's own. West realized with a start that it was Jalenhorm. He slid down from his saddle and grabbed hold of the big man's hand in both of his. It was good to see him. A firm, honest, trustworthy presence. A reminder of a past life, when West did not move among the great men of the world, and things were an awful lot simpler. "How are you, Jalenhorm?" "All right, thank you, sir." Just taking a turn round the camp, waiting. The big man cupped his hands and blew into them, rubbed them together. Trying to stay warm. That's what war is, in my experience. A great deal of waiting, in unpleasant conditions. A great deal of waiting, with occasional moments of the most extreme terror. Jalenhorm gave a dry grin. Something to look forward to then. "How are things on the prince's staff?" West shook his head. "A competition to see who can be most arrogant, ignorant, and wasteful." "How about you? How's the camp life?" "We're not so badly off. It's some of these levies I feel sorry for. They're not fit to fight. I heard a couple of the older ones died last night from the cold. It happens. Let's just hope they bury them deep, and a good way from the rest of us." West could see that the big man thought him heartless, but there it was. Few of the casualties in Gurkle had died in battle. Accidents, illness, little wounds gone bad. You came to expect it. As badly equipped as some of the levies were, they would be burying men every day. "Nothing you need. There is one thing. My horse dropped a shoe in this mud, and I tried to find someone to fit a new one." Jalenhorm spread his hands. "I could be wrong, but I don't think there's a smith in the whole camp." West stared at him. "Not one?" "I couldn't find any. There are forges, anvils, hammers, and all the rest, but no one to work them. I spoke to one of the quartermasters. He said General Polder refused to release any of his smiths, and so did General Croy, and Jalenhorm shrugged his shoulders. "We don't have any. No one thought to check?" "Who?" West felt the familiar headache tugging at the back of his eyes. "Arrows need heads, blades need sharpening, armor and saddles and the carts that hold the supplies break and need to be repaired. An army with no smiths is little better than an army with no weapons." And here they were, out in the frozen country, miles from the nearest settlement. "Unless we passed a penal colony on the way." Jalenhorm squinted as he tried to remember. "Yes, a foundry, I think. I saw smoke above the trees. They would have some skilled metal workers." The big man's eyebrows went up. "Some criminal metal workers. I'll take whatever we can get. Today your horse is short a shoe. Tomorrow we might have nothing to fight with. Get a dozen men together in a wagon. We'll leave at once." The prison loomed up out of the trees through the cold rain. A fence of great, mossy logs tipped with bent and rusted spikes. A grim-looking place with a grim purpose. West swung from his saddle, while Jalenhorm and his men reined up behind him, then squelched across the rutted track to the gate and hammered on the weathered wood with the pommel of his sword. It took a while, but eventually a small hatch snapped open. A pair of gray eyes frowned at him through the slot. Gray eyes above a black mask. A practical of the Inquisition. "My name is Colonel West." The eyes regarded him coldly. "So, I am in the service of Crown Prince Ladisla, and I need to speak to the commandant of this camp." "Why?" West frowned, doing his very best to look impressive with his hair plastered to his scalp and the rain dripping off his chin. "There is a war on, and I do not have time to bandy words with you. I need to speak to the commandant most urgently." The eyes narrowed. They looked at West for a while, and then at the dozen bedraggled soldiers behind him. "All right," said the practical. "You can come in, but only you. The rest will have to wait." The main street was a stretch of churned-up mud between leaning shacks, water trickling from the eaves, spattering into the dirt. There were 2 men and a woman in the road, wet through, struggling to move a cart laden with stones, up to the axles in mush. All 3 had heavy chains on their ankles. Ragged, bony, hollow faces, as empty of hope as they were empty of food. "Get that fucking cart shifted," the practical growled at them, and they stooped back to their unenviable task. West struggled through the muck, towards a stone building at the far end of the camp, trying to hop from one dry patch to another, without success. Another dour practical was standing on the threshold, water running from a stained oilskin over his shoulders, hard eyes following West with a mixture of suspicion and indifference. He and his guide stepped past without a word, and into the dim hall beyond, full of the noise of drumming rain. The practical knocked at an ill-fitting door. "Come in." A small, spare room with gray walls, cold and smelling slightly of damp. A mean fire flickered in the grate. A sagging shelf was stacked with books. A portrait of the King of the Union stared regally down from one wall. A lean man in a black coat sat writing at a cheap desk. He looked at West for a while, then carefully put down his pen and rubbed at the bridge of his nose with an inky thumb and forefinger. "We have a visitor," grunted the practical. "So I see. I am Inquisitor Lorsen, commandant of our little camp." West gave the bony hand the most perfunctory of squeezes. "Colonel West, I am here with Prince Ladisl's army. We are camped a dozen miles to the north, of course. How might I be of assistance to His Highness? We are desperately in need of skilled metal workers. You run a foundry here, correct? A mine, a foundry, and a smithy for the manufacture of farming tools. But I fail to see what excellent. I will take a dozen or so men back with me, the most skilled men you have available." The commandant frowned. "But you must understand that I cannot allow—" "You fail to realize the gravity of the situation," barked West, his temper already fraying. "By all means send a letter to the Archlector. I will send a man back to my camp for a company of soldiers. We can see who gets help first." The commandant thought about that for a while. "Very well," he said eventually. "Follow me." Two dirty children stared at West from the porch of one of the shacks as he stepped out of the commandant's building, back into the incessant drizzle. "You have children here. We have whole families, if they are judged a danger to the state." Lorsen glanced sideways at him. "A shame, but holding the Union together has always required harsh measures. I gather from your silence that you disapprove." West watched one of the shabby children limping through the muck, doomed, perhaps, to spend their whole life in this place. "I think it's a crime," the commandant shrugged. "Don't deceive yourself. Everyone is guilty of something, and even the innocent can be a threat. Perhaps it takes small crimes to prevent bigger ones, Colonel West, but it's up to bigger men than us to decide. I only make sure they work hard, don't prey upon each other, and don't escape. You only do your job, eh? A well-trodden way to avoid responsibility. Which of us is it who lives among them, out here in the middle of nowhere? Which of us is it who watches over them, dresses them, feeds them, cleans them, fights the endless, pointless war against their damn lice? Is it you who stops them beating and raping, killing each other? You're an officer in the King's Own, eh, Colonel? So you live in Adua? In fine quarters in the Agrient, among the rich and well-groomed." West frowned, and Lorsen chuckled at him. "Which of us has truly avoided the responsibility, as you put it? My conscience has never been cleaner. Hate us if you like, we're used to it. No one likes to shake hands with the man who empties the latrine pits either. But pits have to be emptied all the same. Otherwise the world fills up with shit. You can have your dozen Smiths, but don't try to take the high ground with me. There's no high ground here." West didn't like it, but he had to admit the man made a good case. So he set his jaw and struggled on in silence, head down. They squelched towards a long, windowless, stone-built shed, thick smoke roiling up into the misty air from tall chimneys at each corner. The practical slid back the bolt on the heavy door and heaved it open, and West followed him and Lorsen into the darkness. The heat was like a slap in the face after the freezing air outside. Acrid smoke stung at West's eyes, nipped at his throat. The din in the narrow space was frightening. Bellows creaked and wheezed. Hammers clanged on anvils, sending up showers of angry sparks. Red-hot metal hissed furiously in water barrels. There were men everywhere, packed in tight together, sweating and groaning and coughing. Hollow faces half-lit by the orange glow from the forges. "Devils in hell! Stop your work!" roared Lorsen. "Stop and form up!" The men slowly set down their tools, lurched and stumbled and rattled forward to form a line while 4 or 5 practicals looked on from the shadows. A shabby, broken, stooping, sorrowful line. A couple of the men had irons on their wrists as well as their ankles. They scarcely looked like the answer to all of West's problems. But he had no choice. This was all there was. "We have a visitor from outside. Say your piece, Colonel." "My name is Colonel West," he croaked, voice cracking on the stinging air. "There are 10,000 soldiers camped a dozen miles down the road, under Crown Prince Ladisla. We have need of smiths. West cleared his throat, tried to speak louder without coughing his lungs out. Who among you can work metals? No one spoke. The men stared at their threadbare shoes or their bare feet, with the odd sidelong glance at the glowering practicals. You need not be afraid. Who can work metals? I can, sir. A man stepped forward from the line, the irons on his ankles rattling. He was lean and sinewy, slightly stooped. As the lamplight fell across his head, West found himself wincing. He was disfigured by hideous burns. One side of his face was a mass of livid, slightly melted-looking scars. No eyebrow, scalp patchy with pink bald spots. The other side was little better. The man scarcely had a face at all. I can work a forge, and I did some soldiering, too, in Gurkle. Good, muttered West, doing his best to swallow his horror at the man's appearance. Your name? Pike. Are any of these others good with metal, Pike? The burned man shuffled and clanked his way down the line, pulling men forward by their shoulders while the commandant looked on, his frown growing deeper with every passing moment. West licked his dry lips. Hard to believe that in so little time he could have gone from so horribly cold to so horribly hot. But here he was, more uncomfortable than ever. I'll need keys to their irons, Inquisitor. There are no keys. The irons are melted shut. They are not intended ever to be removed, and I would strongly advise you not to. Many of these prisoners are extremely dangerous, and you should bear in mind that you will be returning them to us as soon as you can make alternative arrangements. The Inquisition is not in the business of early releases. He stalked off to speak to one of the practicals. Pike sidled up, pulling another convict by the elbow. Pardon me, sir, he murmured, growling voice kept low. But could you find a place for my daughter? West shrugged his shoulders, uncomfortable. He would have liked to take everyone and burn the damn place to the ground, but he was already pushing his luck. It's not a good idea. A woman in amongst all those soldiers. Not a good idea at all. A better idea than staying here, sir. I can't leave her on her own. She can help me at the forge. She can swing a hammer herself if it comes to that. She's strong. She didn't look strong. She looked skinny and ragged, bony face smeared with soot and grease. West could have taken her for a boy. I'm sorry, Pike, but it's no easy ride where we're going. She grabbed hold of West's arm as he turned away. It's no easy ride here. Her voice was a surprise. Soft, smooth, educated. Cathal is my name. I can work. West looked down at her, ready to shake his arm free, but her expression reminded him of something. Painless, fearless, empty eyes, flat, like a corpse. R.D. Blood smeared across her cheek. West grimaced. The memory was like a wound that wouldn't heal. The heat was unbearable. Every part of him was twitching with discomfort, his uniform like sandpaper against his clammy skin. He had to get out of this horrible place. He looked away, his eyes stinging. Hair, too, he barked. Lawson snorted. Are you joking, Colonel? Believe me, I'm not in a joking mood. Skilled men is one thing. I dare say you need them. But I cannot allow you to simply take whatever prisoners catch your eye. West turned on him with a snarl, his patience worn right through. Her too, I said. If the commandant was impressed by West's fury, he didn't show it. They stood there for a long moment, staring at each other, while the sweat ran down West's face and the blood pounded loud in his temples. Then Lawson nodded slowly. Her too. Very well. I cannot stop you. He leaned in a little closer. But the Archlector will hear about this. He is far away and it might take time for him to hear. But here he will. Even closer yet, almost whispering in West's ear. Perhaps one day you will find yourself visiting us again, but this time to stay. Perhaps in the meantime you should prepare your little lecture on the rights and wrongs of penal colonies. There'll be plenty of time for it. Lawson turned away. Now take my prisoners and go. I have a letter to write. Chapter 10. Rain. Jezal had always found a good storm a thorough amusement. Raindrops lashing at the streets and walls and roofs of the agrient, hissing from the gutters. Something to be smiled out at through the wet window while one sat, warm and dry in one's quarters. Something that took the young ladies in the park by surprise and made them squeal, sticking their dresses excitingly to their clammy skin. Something to be dashed through, laughing with one's friends, as one made one's way from tavern to tavern, before drying out before a roaring fire with a mug of hot spiced wine. Jezal used to enjoy the rain almost as much as the sun. But that was before. Out here on the plains, storms were of a different stamp. This was no petulant child's tantrum, best ignored and soon ended. This was a cold and murderous, merciless and grudge-bearing, bitter and relentless fury of a storm, and somehow it made all the difference that the nearest roof, let alone the nearest tavern, was hundreds of miles behind them. The rain came down in sheets, dousing the endless plain and everything on it with icy water. The fat drops stung at Jezal's scalp like sling stones, nipped at his exposed hands, the tops of his ears, the back of his neck. Water trickled through his hair, through his eyebrows, down his face in rivulets, and into his sodden color. The rain was a gray curtain across the land, obliterating anything more than 100 strides ahead, although out here, of course, there was nothing ahead or anywhere else. Jezal shivered and clutched the collars of his coat together with one hand. A pointless gesture. He was already soaked to his skin. Damn shopkeeper back in Adua had assured him that this coat was entirely waterproof. It had certainly cost him enough, and he had looked very well in it in the shop, quite the rugged outdoorsman, but the seams had begun to leak almost as soon as the first drops fell. For some hours now he had been every bit as wet, as if he had climbed into the bath with his clothes on, and a good deal colder. His boots were full of icy water. His thighs were chafed ragged against his wet trousers. The waterlogged saddle creaked and squelched with every movement of his unhappy horse. His nose was running. His nostrils and his lips were sore. The very reins were painful in his wet palms. His nipples in particular were 2 points of agony in a sea of discomfort. The whole business was utterly unbearable. When will it end? He muttered bitterly to himself, hunching his shoulders and looking up beseechingly at the gloomy heavens, the rain pattering on his face, in his mouth, in his eyes. Happiness seemed at that moment to consist of nothing more than a dry shirt. "Can't you do something?" he moaned at Bayaz. "Like what?" The magus snapped back at him, water coursing down his face and dripping from his bedraggled beard. "You think that I'm enjoying this? Out on the great plain in a bastard of a storm at my age? The skies make no special dispensation for Magi, boy. They piss on everyone the same. I suggest you adjust to it and keep your whining to yourself. A great leader must share the hardships of his followers, of his soldiers, of his subjects. That is how he wins their respect. Great leaders do not complain. Not ever." "Fuck them then," muttered Jezal under his breath. "And this rain, too. You call this rain?" Nine Fingers rode past him. A big smile spread across his ugly lump of a face. Not long after the drops began to come down hard, Jezal had been most surprised to see the Northman shrug off first his battered coat, and then his shirt, roll them up in an oilskin and ride on stripped to the waist, heedless of the water running down his great slab of scarred back, happy as a great hog wallowing in the mud. Such behavior had, at first, struck Jezal as another unforgivable display of savagery, and he had only thanked his stars that the primitive had deigned to keep his trousers on. But as the cold rain began to seep through his coat, he had become less sure. It would have been impossible for him to be any colder or wetter without his clothes, but at least he would have been free of the endless, horrible chafing of wet cloth. 9 Fingers grinned over at him, as though he could read his thoughts. "9, nothing but a drizzle. The sun can't always shine. You have to be realistic." Jezal ground his teeth. If he was told to be realistic one more time, he would stab 9 Fingers with his short steel. Damn half-naked brute. It was bad enough that he had to ride and eat and sleep within 100 strides of a cave-dweller like that, but that he had to listen to his fool advice was an insult almost too deep to bear. "Damn useless primitive," he muttered to himself. "If it comes to a fight, I reckon you'll be glad to have him along." Quay was looking sideways at Jezal, swaying back and forth on the seat of his creaking cart, long hair plastered to his gaunt cheeks by the rain, looking more pale and sickly than ever with a sheen of wet on his white skin. "Who asked your opinion? A man who doesn't want opinions should keep his own mouth shut." The apprentice nodded his dripping head at 9 Fingers back. that there is the Bloody Nine, the most feared man in the north. He's killed more men than the plague. Jezal frowned over at the Northmen, sitting sloppy in his saddle, thought about it for a moment, and sneered. "Doesn't scare me any," he said, as loud as he could without Nine Fingers actually hearing him. Quay snorted. "I'll bet you've never even drawn a blade in anger." "I could start now," growled Jezal, giving his most threatening frown. "Very fierce," chuckled the apprentice, disappointingly unimpressed. "Disappointingly unimpressed, but if you're asking me who's the useless one here, well, I know who I'd rather have left behind." "Why, you," Jezal jumped in his saddle as a bright flash lit the sky, and then another, frighteningly close. Fingers of light clawed at the bulging undersides of the clouds, snaked through the darkness overhead. Long thunder rolled out across the gloomy plain, popped and crackled under the wind. By the time it faded, the wet cart had already rolled away, robbing Jezal of his chance to retort. "Damn idiot apprentice," he murmured, frowning at the back of his head. At first, when the flashes had come, Jezal had tried to keep his spirits up by imagining his companions struck down by lightning. It would have been oddly appropriate, for instance, had Bayaz been cooked to a cinder by a stroke from the heavens. Jezal soon despaired of any such deliverance, however, even as a fantasy. The lightning would never kill more than one of them in a day, and if one of them had to go, he had slowly begun to hope it might be him. A moment of brilliant illumination, then sweet oblivion. The kindest escape from this nightmare. A trickle of water ran down Jezal's back, tickling at his raw skin. He longed to scratch it, but he knew that if he did, he would only create 10 more itches, spread across his shoulder blades and his neck, and all the places hardest to reach with a hooked finger. He closed his eyes, and his head slowly drooped under the weight of his desperation, until his wet chin hung against his wet chest. It had been raining the last time he saw her. He remembered it all with a painful clarity. The bruise on her face, the color of her eyes, the set of her mouth, one side twisted up. Just thinking of it made him have to swallow that familiar lump in his throat. The lump he swallowed 20 times a day. First thing in the morning, when he woke, and last thing at night, as he lay on the hard ground. To be back with RD now, safe and warm, seemed like the realization of all his dreams. He wondered how long she might wait, as the weeks dragged on and she received no word. Might she even now be writing daily letters to Angland that he would never receive? Letters expressing her tender feelings, letters desperately seeking news, letters begging for replies. Now her worst expectations would all be confirmed, that he was a faithless ass and a liar, and had forgotten all about her when nothing could have been further from the truth. He ground his teeth in frustration and despair at the thought, but what could he do? Replies were hard to send from a blighted, blasted, ruined wasteland. Even supposing he could have written one in this epic downpour. He inwardly cursed the names of Bayaz and Nine Fingers, of Longfoot and Quay. He cursed the old empire, and he cursed the endless plain. He cursed the whole demented expedition. It was becoming an hour ritual. Jezal began to perceive, dimly, that he had until now had rather an easy life. It seemed strange that he had moaned so long and hard about rising early to fence, or about lowering himself to play cards with Lieutenant Brint, or about how his sausages were always a touch overdone of a morning. He should have been laughing, bright-eyed, and with a spring in his step, simply to have been out of the rain. He coughed and sniffed and wiped at his sore nose with his sore hand. At least with so much water around, no one would notice him weeping. Only Pharaoh looked as if she was enjoying herself even less than him, occasionally glaring at the pissing clouds, her face wrinkled up with hatred and horror. Her spiky hair was plastered flat to her skull. Her waterlogged clothes hung limp from her scrawny shoulders. Water ran down her scarred face and dripped from the end of her sharp nose, the point of her sharp chin. She looked like a mean-tempered cat, dunked unexpectedly in a pond, its body suddenly seeming a quarter of the size it had been, stripped of all its air of menace. Perhaps a woman's voice might be the thing to lift him from this state of mind, and Pharaoh was the nearest thing to a woman within 100 miles. He spurred his horse up alongside her, doing his best to smile, and she turned her scowl on him. Jezal found to his discomfort that at close quarters much of the menace returned. He had forgotten about those eyes, yellow eyes, sharp as knives, pupils small as pinpricks. Strange and disconcerting. He wished he had never approached her now, but he could hardly go without saying something. Bet it doesn't rain much where you come from, eh? Are you going to shut your fucking hole, or do I have to hurt you? Jezal cleared his throat and quietly allowed his mount to drop back away from her. Crazy bitch, he whispered under his breath. Damn her, then. She could keep her misery. He wasn't about to start wallowing in self-pity. That wasn't his way at all. The rain had finally stopped when they came upon the place, but the air was still full of heavy damp. The sky above was still full of strange colors. The evening sun pierced the swirling clouds with pink and orange, casting an eerie glow over the gray plain. 2 empty carts stood upright. Another was tipped up on its side, one wheel broken off, a dead horse still tethered to it, lying with its pink tongue lolling out of its mouth, a pair of broken arrows sticking from its bloody side. The corpses were scattered all around in the flattened grass, like dolls discarded by a bad-tempered child. Some had deep wounds, or limbs broken, or arrows poking from their bodies. One had an arm off at the shoulder, a short length of snapped bone sticking out as if from a butcher's joint. Rubbish was scattered all around them. Broken weapons, splintered wood, a few trunks smashed open, rolls of cloth ripped out and slashed across the wet ground, burst barrels, shattered boxes, rooted through and looted. Merchants, grunted Nine Fingers, looking down, like we're pretending to be. Life's cheap out here, all right. Pharaoh curled her lip. Where isn't it? The wind whipped cold across the plain, cutting clean through Jezal's damp clothes. He had never seen a corpse before. And here were laid out how many? At least a dozen. He started to feel slightly peculiar halfway through counting them. No one else seemed much moved, though familiarity with violence was hardly surprising among these characters. Pharaoh was crawling around the bodies, peering down and prodding them with as little emotion as an undertaker. Nine Fingers looked as though he had seen far worse, which Jezal did not doubt he had, and done far worse besides. Bayaz and Longfoot both looked mildly troubled, but not much more so than if they had come upon some unknown horse tracks. Quay scarcely even looked interested. Jezal could have done with a share of their indifference at that moment. He would not have admitted it, but he was feeling more than a little sick. That skin, slack and still, and waxy pale, beaded with wet from the rain. That clothing, ripped and rifled through, missing boots, or coats, or shirts even. Those wounds, ragged red lines, blue and black bruises, rips and tears and gaping mouths in flesh. Jezal turned suddenly in his saddle, looking behind, to the left, to the right, but every view was the same. Nowhere to run to, if he had even known in what direction the nearest settlement lay. In a group of 6, and yet he felt utterly alone. In a vast, open space, and yet he felt utterly trapped. One of the corpses seemed to be staring, unnervingly, straight at him. A young man, no more than Jezal's age, with sandy hair and protruding ears. He could have done with a shave, except, of course, that it hardly mattered now. There was a yawning red gash across his belly, his bloody hands lying on either side of it, as though trying to squeeze it shut. His guts glistened wetly inside, all purple-red. Jezal felt his gorge rising. He was already feeling faint from eating too little that morning, damn sick of dry biscuit, and he could hardly force down the slops the others put together. He turned away from the sickening scene and stared down at the grass, pretending to be searching for important clues while his stomach clenched and heaved. He gripped his reins as tightly as he could, forcing down the spit as it rushed into his mouth. He was a proud son of the Union, damn it. What was more, he was a nobleman, of a distinguished family. What was still more, he was a bold officer of the King's Own, and a winner of the contest. To vomit at the sight of a little gore would be to disgrace himself before this mixture of fools and primitives, and that could under no circumstances be permitted. The honor of his nation was at stake. He glared fixedly at the wet ground, and he clamped his teeth shut, and he ordered his stomach to be still. Gradually it began to work. He sucked in deep breaths through his nose, cool, damp, calming air. He was in complete control. He looked back at the others. Pharaoh was squatting on the ground with her hand in one of the victim's gaping wounds as far almost as her wrist. Cold? She snapped at Nine Fingers, been dead since this morning at least. She pulled her hand out, fingers slimy with gore. Jezal had belched half his meager breakfast down his coat before he had time even to slide out of his saddle. He staggered a couple of drunkard steps, took a gasping breath, and retched again. He bent over, hands on his knees, head spinning, spitting bile out onto the grass. "You all right?" Jezal glanced up, doing his best to look nonchalant with a long string of bitter drool hanging from his face. "Something I ate," he muttered, wiping at his nose and mouth with his trembling hand. A pitiful ruse, he had to admit. Ninefingers only nodded, though. "That meat this morning, most likely. I've been feeling sick myself." He gave one of his revolting smiles and offered Jezal a water skin. "Best keep drinking. Flush it away, huh?" Jezal sloshed a mouthful of water round his mouth and spat it out, watching Ninefingers walk back to the bodies, and frowning. That had been strange. Coming from another source, it might have seemed almost a generous gesture. He took another swig of water, and began to feel better. He made somewhat unsteadily for his horse, and clambered back into the saddle. Whoever did it was well armed, and in numbers Pharaoh was saying, "The grass is full of tracks." "We should be careful," said Jezal, hoping to impose himself on the conversation. Bayaz turned sharply to look at him. "We should always be careful. That goes without saying. How far are we from Darmium?" Longfoot squinted up at the sky, then out across the plain. He licked his finger and held it up to the wind. "Even for a man of my talents, it is hard to be accurate without the stars. 50 miles or thereabouts. We'll need to turn off the track soon. We are not crossing the river at Darmium. The city is in chaos. Cabrian holds it and admits no one. We cannot take the risk. Very well. Astum it is. We will take a wide route round Darmium and off westward. A slightly longer path, but no. The bridge at Iastum lies in ruins." Longfoot frowned. "Gone, eh? Truly, God loves to test his faithful. We may have to ford the Aos then." "No," said Bayaz. "The rains have been heavy, and the great river is deep. The fords are all closed to us." The navigator looked puzzled. "You, of course, are my employer, and as a proud member of the Order of Navigators, I will always do my utmost to obey. But I am afraid that I can see no other way. If we cannot cross at Darmium, or at Ostum, and we cannot ford the river, there is one other bridge, there is." Longfoot looked baffled for a moment. Then his eyes suddenly widened. "You cannot mean—" "The bridge at Alcus still stands." Everyone glanced at each other for a moment, frowning. "I thought you said the place was a ruin," said Ninefingers. "A shattered graveyard, I heard," murmured Pharaoh. "I thought you said no one goes within miles of the place." "It would hardly have been my first choice, but there are no others. We will join the river and follow the northern bank to Alcus." Nobody moved. Longfoot in particular had a look of stunned horror on his face. "Now," snapped Bayaz, "it is plainly not safe to remain here." And with that he turned his horse away from the corpses. Quay shrugged and flicked his reins, and the cart grumbled off through the grass after the first of the Magi. Longfoot and Ninefingers followed behind, all frowns and foreboding. Jezal stared at the bodies, still lying where they had found them, their eyes staring accusingly up into the darkening sky. "Shouldn't we bury them, if you like?" grunted Pharaoh, springing up into the saddle in one easy motion. "Maybe you could bury them in puke." Chapter 11. Bloody company. Riding. That was what they were doing. That was what they'd been doing for days. Riding, looking for Bethad with winter coming on. Bog and forest, hill and valley. Rain and sleet, fog and snow. Looking for signs that he was coming their way, and knowing that there wouldn't be any. A lot of wasted time, to the dogman's mind, but once you've been fool enough to ask for a task, you better do the one you're given. "Stupid bloody job this," snarled Dow, wincing and twitching and fussing with his reins. He'd never been too much of a one for horseback. Liked to keep his feet on the ground and pointed at the enemy. "Waste of our fucking time. How'd you put up with scouting, dog man? Stupid bloody job. Someone's got to get it done, don't they? Least I got a horse now." "Well, I'm right delighted for you," he sneered. "You got a horse?" The dogman shrugged his shoulders. Better than walking, eh?" scoffed Dow. "That just binds it all up. I got new breeches and all, not to mention good woolens. The wind don't blow half so cold round my fruits no more. They got a chuckle from Tull, but it seemed Dow wasn't in a laughing mood. Wind round your fruits, by the fucking dead boy. Is this what we're come to? You forgotten who you are. You was 9 fingers closest. You came over the mountains with him in the first place. You're in all them songs along with him. You scouted at the head of armies. 1,000 men, all following your say-so. That didn't turn out too happy for anyone concerned, muttered Dogman. But Dow was already laying into Tull. And how about you, big man? Tull Duru Thunderhead, strongest bastard in the north. Wrestled bears and won, I heard. Held the pass all alone while your clan got clean away. A giant, they say, 10 feet tall, born under a storm, and with a belly full of thunder. What about it, giant? The only thunder I've heard you make lately is when you take a shit. What of it? Snarled Tull. You any different? Men used to whisper your name, scared to speak it out loud. They'd grip their weapons tight and stick close by the fire if they thought you was within 10 leagues. Black Dow, they used to say, quiet and cunning and ruthless as the wolf. He's killed more men than Winter, and he's got less pity in him. Who cares a shit now, eh? Times have changed, and you rolled just as far downhill as the rest of us. Dow only smiled. That's my point, big lad. That's just my point. We used to be something, each one of us, named men, known men, feared men. I remember my brother telling me that there ain't no better man than Harding Grim, with bow nor blade, no better man in all the north. Steadiest damn hand in the whole circle of the world. How about that, eh, Grim? Said Grim. Dow nodded his head. Exactly what I'm saying. Now look at us. We ain't so much rolled downhill as fell off a bloody cliff, running errands for these southerners. These fucking women in men's trousers. These damn salad-eaters with their big words, and their thin little swords. Dogman shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable. That West knows what he's about. That West, sneered Dow. He knows his arse from his mouth, and in that he's a damn stretch better than the rest, but he's soft as pig fat, and you know it. Got no bones in him at all. None of 'em have. I'd be shocked to my roots if the better part of 'em have ever seen a skirmish. You reckon they'd stand a charge from Bethod's carls? He snorted hard laughter to himself. Now there's a joke. It can't be denied they're a piss-weak crowd, muttered Tull, and the dogmen couldn't very well disagree. Half of 'em are too hungry to lift a weapon, let alone swing one with some fire if they could even work out how. All the good ones went north to fight Bethod, leaving us here with the scrapings from the pot. Scrapings from a piss-pot, I'm thinking. What about you, Three Trees? Called Dow. The Rock of Euphrith, eh? You were the spike up Bethod's arse for 6 months. A hero to every right-thinking man in the north. Rudd Three Trees. There's a man carved out of stone. There's a man who never backs down. You want honor? You want dignity? You want to know what a man should be? Look no fucking further. What do you make of all this? Running errands. Checking these bogs for Bethod where we all know he ain't. Work fit for boys and we're lucky to get it, I suppose. Three Trees pulled up his horse and turned it slowly round. He sat in his saddle, hunched up, tired-looking, and he stared at Dow for a minute. Open your ears and listen for once, he said. 'Cause I don't want to be telling you this every mile we go. The world ain't how I'd like it in all kind o' ways. Nine Fingers has gone back to the mud. Baythod's made himself king of the Northmen. The Shanka are fixing to come swarming over the mountains. I've walked too far and fought too long and heard enough shit from you to fill a lifetime, and all at an age when I should have my feet up with sons to take care o' me. So you can see I got bigger problems than that life hasn't turned out the way you hoped. You can harp on the past all you please, Dow, like some old woman upset 'cause her tits used to stay up by themselves. Or you can shut your fucking hole and help me get on with things. He gave each one of 'em a look in the eye, and the dogmen felt a touch shamed for doubting him. As for checking for Bethod where he ain't, well, Baythod's never been one to turn up where he's supposed to be. Scouting's the task we've been given, and scouting's the task I mean to get done. He leaned forward in his saddle. So how's this for a fucking formula? Mouth shut, eyes open, and he turned and nudged his horse on through the trees. Dow took a deep breath. Fair enough, Chief, fair enough. It's just a shame is all. It's just a shame is all. That's what I'm saying. Just a shame. There's 3 of 'em, said Dogman. Northmen for certain, but hard to tell their clan. Being as they're down here, I'm guessing they follow Bethod. More unlikely, said Tull. More unlikely, said Tull. Seems that's the fashion these days. Just 3, asked 3 trees. No reason for Bethod to have 3 men on their own all the way out here. Must be more nearby. Let's deal with the 3, growled Dow, and get to the rest later. I came here to fight. You came here 'cause I dragged you here, snapped 3 trees. You was all for turning back an hour ago. Said Grim. We can get around if we need to. Dogman pointed through the cold woods. They're up on the slope there in the trees. No trouble to get around. 3 trees looked up at the sky, pink and gray through the branches, and shook his head. No, we're losing the light, and I wouldn't like leaving 'em behind us in the dark. Since we're here, and since they're here, we'd best deal with 'em. Weapons it is. He squatted down, talking quiet. Here's how we'll do it. Dogman, get round and above, up on that slope there. Take the one on the left when you hear the signal. You follow me? The one on the left. And best not to miss. Not to miss. Aye, said Dogman. On the left. Not missing more or less went without saying. Dow, you slide in quiet and take the middle. The middle, growled Dow. He's done. That leaves one for you, Grim. Grim nodded without looking up, rubbing at his bow with a rag. Nice and clean, boys. I don't want to be putting one on you in the mud over this. Places, then. The Dogman found a good spot up above Bathod's 3 scouts and watched from behind a tree trunk. Seemed like he'd done this 100 times, but it never got any easier on the nerves, probably just as well. It's when it gets easy that a man makes mistakes. Dogman was watching for him, so he just caught sight of Dow in the fading light, slithering up through the brush, eyes fixed ahead on his task. He was getting close now, real close. Dogman knocked an arrow and took an aim at the one on the left, breathing slow to keep his hands steady. It was then that he realized. Now he was on the other side. The one that had been on the left was on the right. So which one should he shoot? He cursed to himself, struggling to remember what 3 trees said. Get around and take the one on the left. Worst thing of all would have been to do nothing, so he aimed up at the one on his left and hoped for the best. He heard 3 trees call from down below, sounding like a bird out in the woods. Dow gathered himself to jump. Dogman let his arrow fly. It thudded into the back of his task, just as Grim's arrow stuck him in the front, and Dow seized hold of the middle one and stabbed him from behind. That left one of them untouched and very surprised looking. Shit, whispered the Dogman. Help! Screamed the last of them, before Dow jumped on him. They rolled in the leaves, grunting and thrashing. Dow's arm went up and down once, twice, 3 times. Then he stood up, glaring through the trees and looking mighty annoyed. Dogman was just shrugging his shoulders when he heard a voice behind him. What? Dogman froze, cold all over. Another one, out in the bushes, not 10 strides away. He reached for an arrow and knocked it, real quiet, then turned slowly round. He saw 2 of them, and they saw him, and his mouth went sour as old beer. They all stared. Dogman aimed at the bigger one and pulled the string right back. No, he shouted. The arrow thudded into his chest and he groaned and stumbled, fell down on his knees. Dogman dropped his bow and made a snatch at his knife, but he hadn't got it drawn before the other one was on him. They went down hard in the brush and started rolling. Light, dark, over and over they went, down the slope, kicking and tearing and punching at each other. Dogman's head smacked against something, and he was down on his back, wrestling with this bastard. They hissed at each other, not words exactly. Sounds like dogs make fighting. The man pulled his hand free and got a blade out from somewhere, and Dogman caught his wrist before he could stab it home. He was pushing down with all his weight, both hands on the knife. Dogman was pushing the other way, both hands on his wrists hard as he could, but not hard enough. The blade was coming down slowly, down towards Dogman's face. He was staring at it cross-eyed, a tooth of bright metal not a foot from his nose. You fucker! And it came down another inch. The Dogman's shoulders, his arms, his hands were burning, running out of strength. Staring at his face, stubble on his chin, yellow teeth, pockmarks on his bent nose, hair hanging down around it. The point of the blade nudged closer. Dogman was dead, and there was no help for it. Snick. And his head wasn't there anymore. Blood washed over Dogman's face, hot and sticky and reeking. The corpse went slack, and he shoved it away. Blood in his eyes, blood up his nose, blood in his mouth. He staggered up, gasping and choking and spitting. "All right, Dogman. You're all right, Dogman. You're all right." Tool must have come up on them while they were struggling. "I'm still alive," Dogman whispered, the way Logen used to when a fight was done. Still alive. By the dead, though, that had been a close thing. "They ain't got too much in the way of gear," Dow was saying, poking round the campsite. "Cookpot on the fire, weapons and such like, but not much food. Not enough to be all alone out there in the woods. Scouts, maybe," said Three Trees. "Outriders for some bigger band? Reckon there must be," said Dow. Three Trees slapped his hand down on the Dogman's shoulder. "You all right?" He was still busy trying to rub the blood off his face. I think so. Bit shaky still, but that would settle. "Cuts and scrapes, I reckon? Nothing I'll die of." "Good. 'Cause I can't spare you. Why don't you take a creep up through them trees and have a look-see, while we clear up this mess here? Find who these bastards were scouting for." "Right enough," said the Dogman, sucking in a big breath and blowing it out. "Right enough. Stupid bloody job, eh, Dow?" whispered Three Trees. "Work fit for boys, and we're lucky to get it? What do you say now?" "Could be I made a mistake. A big one," said the Dogman. "There were 100 fires burning down there on the dark slopes. 100 fires and more. There were men down there, too. It hardly needed saying. Thralls, mostly lightly armed, but plenty of carls as well. Dogman could see the last light of the day glinting on their spear tips, and their shield rims, and their mail coats. Polished up and ready for a fight, clustered round close to the flapping standards of each clan's chieftain. Lots of standards. 20 of 'em, or 30 even, at a quick count. The Dogmen had never seen more than 10 together before. "Biggest army there's ever been out of the north," he muttered. "Aye," said Three Trees. "All fighting for Bethod, and not 5 days' ride from the Southerners." He pointed down at one of the banners. "That Littlebones standard down there." "Aye," growled Dow and spat into the brush. "That's his mark, all right. I got scores with that bastard." "There's a world of scores down there," said Three Trees. "That's Peleus Snow's banner and Whitesides and Crendel Goring's over by them rocks. That's some bloody company. Them as went over to Bethod near the beginning. All grown fat on it now, I reckon." "What about them ones?" asked the Dogman, pointing out at some that he didn't recognize, evil-looking signs all leather and bones. "Looked like Hillman's marks to him, maybe. That and Crummock Fail's standard, is it?" "Nah. He'd never have kneeled to Bethod or anyone else. That mad bastard'll still be up there in the mountains somewhere, calling to the moon and all the rest. Less Bethod done for him," grunted Dow. Three Trees shook his head. "Doubt it. Canny bastard. That Crummock. Been holding Bethod off for years up in the high places. He knows all the ways, they say." "Whose signs are they then?" asked Dogman. "Don't know. Could be some boys from out east, past the Crinna. There's some strange folk out that way. You know any one of them banners, Grim?" "Aye," said Grim, but that was all he said. "Don't hardly matter whose signs they are," muttered Dow. "Just look at the numbers of 'em. There's half the fucking north down there. And the worst half," said Dogman. He was looking at Bethod's sign, set up in the middle of the host. A red circle daubed on black hides. An acre of 'em, it looked like, big as a field, mounted on a tall pine trunk, flapping evil in the wind. "Huge, great thing. Wouldn't fancy carrying it," he muttered. Dow slithered over and leaned in close. "Might be that we could sneak in there in the dark," he whispered. "Might be we could sneak in and put a blade in Bethod." They all looked at each other. It was a terrible risk, but Dogman had no doubts it was worth the trying. Wasn't a one of them hadn't dreamed of sending Bethod back to the mud. "Put a blade in him." Grunted Grim. "That's a task worth doing," hissed Dow. "That's real work," Dogman nodded, looking down at all them fires. "No doubt noble work. Work for named men like them, or like they used to be, maybe. There'd be some songs about that, all right." Dogman's blood was rushing at the thought, skin prickling on his hands, but Three Trees was having none of it. "No, we can't risk it. We got to go back and tell the Union. Tell 'em they got guests coming. Bad guests and in numbers. He tugged at his beard, and Dogman could tell he didn't like it, backing off. None of them did, but they knew he was right, even Dow. Chances were they'd never get to Bethod, and if they did, they'd never get out. We got to go back, said Dogman. Fair enough, said Dow. We go back. Shame, though. Aye, said Three Trees. Shame, Chapter 12, Long Shadows. By the dead. Pharaoh said nothing, but for the first time since Logen met her, the scowl had slipped off. Her face was slack, mouth hanging slightly open. Luther, on the other hand, was grinning like a fool. You ever see anything like that? He shouted over the noise, pointing out at it with a trembling hand. There is nothing else like that, said Bayaz. Logen had to admit that he'd been wondering what all the fuss was about when it came to crossing a river. Some of the bigger ones in the north could be a problem, especially in the wrong season, and with a lot of gear to carry. But if there was no bridge, you found a good ford, held your weapons over your head, and sloshed across. Might take a while for your boots to dry out, and you had to keep your eyes well open for an ambush, but otherwise there was nothing much to fear from a river. Good place to fill your water skin. Filling your skin at the AOS would have been a dangerous business, at least without 100 strides of rope. Logen had once stood on the cliffs near Ufrith, and watched the waves crash against the rocks far below, the sea stretching away, grey and foaming out of sight. A dizzy and a humbling and a warm place to stand. The feeling at the brink of the great river's canyon was much the same, except that a quarter-mile away or so another cliff rose up from the water. The far bank, if you could use the word about a towering rock face. He shuffled up gingerly to the very edge, prodding at the soft ground with the toes of his boots, and peered over the brink. Not a good idea. The red earth overhung slightly, bound up with white grass roots, and then the jagged rocks dropped away, almost sheer, where the frothing water slapped against them. Far below, it sent great plumes of bright spray into the air, clouds of damp mist that Logen could almost feel on his face. Tufts of long grass clung to the cracks and the ledges, and birds flitted between them, hundreds of small white birds. Logen could just make out their twittering calls over the mighty rumble of the river. He thought on being dropped into that thundering weight of dark water, sucked, and whirled, and ripped around like a leaf in the storm. He swallowed, and shuffled cautiously back from the edge, looking around for something to cling onto. He felt tiny and weightless, as if a strong gust of wind might snatch him away. He could almost feel the water moving through his boots, the surging, rolling, unstoppable power of it, making the very earth tremble. So you can see why a bridge might be such a good idea, shouted Bayaz in his ear. How can you even build a bridge across that? At Ostum, the river splits in 3, and the canyon is much less deep. The Emperor's architects built islands and made their bridges of many small arches. Even so, it took them 12 years to build. The bridge at Darmium is the work of Canidius himself, a gift to his brother Juvens when they were yet on good terms. It crosses the river in a single span. How he did it, none now can say. Bayaz turned for the horses. Get the others, we should keep moving. Pharaoh was already walking back from the brink. So much rain. She looked over her shoulder, frowned and shook her head. Don't get rivers like that where you come from, eh? Out in the Badlands, water is the most precious thing you can have. Men kill over a bottle of it. That's where you were born. The Badlands? A strange name for a place, but it sounded about right for her. There are no births in the Badlands, Pink. Only deaths. Harsh land, eh? Where were you born, then? She scowled. What do you care? Just trying to be friendly. Friends, she sneered, brushing past him towards the horses. Why? You got so many out here you couldn't use another. She stopped, half turned, and looked at him through narrowed eyes. My friends don't last, Pink. Nor do mine, but I reckon I'll take the risk if you will. All right, she said, but there was nothing friendly in her face. The Gurkish conquered my home when I was a child, and they took me for a slave. They took all the children. A slave. Yes, fool, a slave. Bought and sold like meat by the butcher, owned by someone else, and they do as they please with you, like they would with a goat, or a dog, or the dirt in their gardens. That what you want to know, friend? Logen frowned. We don't have that custom in the north. SSSS, she hissed, lip curling with scorn. Good for fucking you. The ruin loomed over them, a forest of shattered pillars, a maze of broken walls, the ground around it strewn with fallen blocks as long as a man was tall. Crumbling windows and empty doorways yawned like wounds, a ragged black outline, chopped out from the flying clouds like a giant row of broken teeth. "What city was this?" asked Luther. "No city," said Bayaz. "At the height of the old time, at the greatest extent of the emperor's power, this was his winter palace. All this—" Logen squinted at the sprawling wreck. "One man's house, and not even the whole year round. Most of the time the court would stay in Alcus. In winter, when the cold snows swept down off the mountains, the emperor would bring his retinue here, an army of guardsmen, of servants, of cooks, of officials, of princes, and children, and wives making their way across the plain ahead of the cold winds, taking up residence here for 3 short months, in the echoing halls, the beautiful gardens, the gilded chambers." Bayaz shook his bald head. "In times long past, before the war, this place glittered like the sea beneath the rising sun." Luther sniffed. "So Glustrod tore it down, I suppose?" "No, it was not in that war, but another that it fell, many years later. A war fought by my order, after the death of Juvens, against his eldest brother, Canidius," muttered Quai, the master maker. "A war just as bitter, just as brutal, just as merciless as the one before, and even more was lost. Juvens and Canidius both in the end. Not a happy family," muttered Logen. "No," Bayaz frowned up at the mighty wreckage. "No." Bayaz frowned up at the mighty wreckage. "With the death of the Maker, the last of the 4 sons of Uz, the old time ended. We are left only with the ruins, and the tombs, and the myths. Little men, kneeling in the long shadows of the past." Pharaoh stood up in her stirrups. "There are riders," she barked, staring off at the horizon. 40 or more." "Where?" snapped Bayaz, shading his eyes. "I don't see anything, nor could Logen." "Only the waving grass and the towering clouds." Longfoot frowned. "I see no riders, and I am blessed with perfect vision." "Why, I have often been told that. You want to wait until you see them," hissed Pharaoh, "or get off the road before they see us." "We'll head into the ruins," snapped Bayaz over his shoulder, "and wait for them to pass. Malachus, turn the cart. Turn the cart." The wreck of the winter palace was full of shadows, and stillness, and decay. The outsize ruins towered around them, all covered with old ivy and wet moss, streaked and crusted with the droppings of bird and bat. The animals had made the place their palace now. Birds sang from 1,000 nests high in the ancient masonry. Spiders had spun great glistening webs in leaning doorways, heavy with sparkling beads of dew. Tiny lizards sunned themselves in patches of light on the fallen blocks, swarming away as they came near. The rattling of the cart over the broken ground, the footfalls and the hoofbeats echoed back from the slimy stones. Everywhere, water dripped and ran and plopped in hidden pools. "Take this, Pink." Pharaoh slapped her sword into Logen's hands. "Where are you going? You wait down here and stay out of sight." She jerked her head upwards. "I'll watch them from up there." As a boy, Logen had never been out of the trees round the village. As a young man, he'd spent days in the high places, testing himself against the mountains. At Hionan in the winter, the hillmen had held the high pass. Even Bethod had thought that there was no way round. But Logen had found a way up the frozen cliff and settled that score. He could see no way up here, though. Not without an hour or two to spare. Cliffs of leaning blocks heavy with dead creeper, crags of tottering stonework slick with moss, seeming to lean and tip as the clouds moved fast above. "How the hell you planning to get up?" She was already halfway up one of the pillars. She didn't so much climb as swarm like an insect, hand over hand. She paused at the top for a moment, found a footing she liked, then sprang through the air, right over Logen's head, landed on the wall behind and scrambled up onto it, sending a shower of broken mortar down into his face. She squatted on the top and frowned down at him. "Just try not to make too much noise," she hissed, then was gone. "Did you see?" muttered Logen. But the others had already moved further into the damp shadows, and he hurried after them, not wanting to be left alone in this overgrown graveyard. Quay had pulled his cart up further on, and was leaning against it beside the restless horses. The first of the Magi was kneeling near him in the weeds, rubbing at the lichen-crusted wall with his palms. "Look at this," snapped Bayaz as Logen tried to edge past. "These carvings here, masterpieces of the ancient world, stories and lessons and warnings from history." His thick fingers brushed gently at the scarred stone. "We might be the first men to look upon these in centuries." Muttered Logen, puffing out his cheeks. "Look here." Bayaz gestured at the wall. "Uz gives his gifts to his 3 oldest sons, while Glukta looks on from the shadows. The birth of the 3 pure disciplines of magic. Some craftsmanship, eh? Right? And here," grunted Bayaz, knocking some weeds away and shuffling along to the next mossy panel, "Glukta plans to destroy his brother's work. He had to tear at a tangle of dead ivy to get at the one beyond. He breaks the first law. He hears voices from the world below, you see. He summons devils and sends them against his enemies. And in this one," he muttered, tugging at the weight of brown creeper, "let me see now." "Glukta digs," muttered Quay. "Who knows? In the next one he might even have found what he's looking for." Grumbled the first of the Magi, letting the ivy fall back across the wall. He glowered at his apprentice as he stood up, frowning. "Perhaps sometimes the past is better left covered." Logen cleared his throat and edged away, ducked quickly under a leaning archway. The wide space beyond was filled with small, knotty trees, planted in rows, but long overgrown. Great weeds and nettles, brown and sagging rotten from the rain, stood almost waist-high around the mossy walls. "Perhaps I should not say it myself," came Longfoot's cheerful voice, "but it must be said. My talent for navigation stands alone. It rises above the skills of every other navigator as the mountain rises over the deep valley." Logen winced, but it was Bayaz's anger or Longfoot's bragging, and that was no choice at all. "I have led us across the great plain to the river Aos without a deviation of even a mile." The navigator beamed at Logen and Luther, as though expecting an avalanche of praise, "and without a single dangerous encounter, in a land reckoned among the most dangerous under the sun." He frowned. "Perhaps a quarter of our epic journey is now safely behind us. I am not sure that you appreciate the difficulty involved. Across the featureless plain as autumn turns to winter, and without even the stars to reckon by." He shook his head. Truly the pinnacle of achievement is a lonely place." He turned away and wandered over to one of the trees. "The lodgings are a little past their best, but at least the fruit trees are still in working order." Longfoot plucked a green apple from a low-hanging branch and began to shine it on his sleeve. "Nothing like a fine apple, and from the Emperor's orchard, no less." He grinned to himself. "Strange, eh? How the plants outlast the greatest works of men." Luther sat down on a fallen statue nearby, slid the longer of his 2 swords from its sheath, and laid it across his knees. Steel glinted mirror-bright as he turned it over in his lap, frowned at it, licked a finger and scrubbed at some invisible blemish. He pulled out his whetstone, spat on it, and carefully set to work on the long, thin blade. The metal rang gently as the stone moved back and forward. It was soothing somehow, that sound, that ritual familiar from 1,000 campfires of Logen's past. "Must you?" asked Brother Longfoot. "Sharpening, polishing, morning and night. It makes my head hurt. It's not as if you've even made any use of them yet. Probably find when you need them that you've sharpened them away to nothing, eh?" He chuckled at his own joke. "Where will you be then?" Luther didn't even bother to look up. "Why don't you keep your mind on getting us across this damn plain, and leave the swords to those who know the difference?" Logen grinned to himself. An argument between the 2 most arrogant men he had ever met was well worth watching, in his opinion. "Huh," snorted Longfoot. "Show me someone who knows the difference and I'll happily never mention blades again." He lifted the apple to his mouth, but before he could bite into it, his hand was empty. Luther had moved almost too fast to follow, and speared it on the glinting point of his sword. "Give me that back!" Luther stood up. Of course, he tossed it off the end of the blade with a practiced flick of his wrist. Before Longfoot's reaching hands could close around it, Luther had snatched his short sword from its sheath and whipped it blurring through the air. The navigator was left juggling with the 2 even halves for a moment before dropping them both in the dirt. "Damn, you're showing off," he snapped. "We can't all have your modesty," muttered Luther. Logen chuckled to himself, while Longfoot stomped back over to the tree, staring up into the branches for another apple. "Nice trick," he grunted, strolling through the weeds to where Luther was sitting. "You're quick with those needles." The young man gave a modest shrug. "It has been remarked upon. Stabbing an apple and stabbing a man were two different things, but quickness was some kind of start." Logen looked down at Pharaoh's sword, turned it over in his hands, then slid it out from its wooden sheath. It was a strange weapon to his mind. Grip and blade both gently curved, thicker at the end than at the hilt, sharpened only down one edge, with scarcely any point on it at all. He swung it in the air a couple of times. Strange weight, more like an axe than a sword. "Odd-looking thing," muttered Luther. Logen checked the edge with his thumb. Rough feeling it dragged at the skin. "Sharp, though. Don't you ever sharpen yours?" Logen frowned. He reckoned he must have spent weeks of his life, all told, sharpening the weapons he'd carried. Every night, out on the trail, after the meal, men would sit and work at their gear, steel scraping on metal and stone, flashing in the light of the campfires, sharpening, cleaning, polishing, tightening. His hair might have been caked with mud, his skin stiff with old sweat, his clothes riddled with lice, but his weapons had always gleamed like the new moon. He took hold of the cold grip and pulled the sword that Bayaz had given him out of its stained scabbard. It looked a slow and ugly thing compared to Luther's swords, and to Pharaoh's too, if it came to that. There was hardly any shine on the heavy gray blade at all. He turned it over in his hand. The single silver letter glinted near the hilt. "The mark of Canidius. Don't know why, but it doesn't need sharpening. I tried it to begin with, but all it did was wear down the stone." Longfoot had hauled himself up into one of the trees, and was slithering along a thick branch towards an apple hanging out of reach near its end. "If you ask me," grunted the navigator, "the weapons suit their owners to the ground. Captain Luther flash and fine-looking but never used in combat. The woman Malgin sharp and vicious and worrying to look upon. The Northman Ninnafingershevi, solid, slow, and simple." "Ha!" he chuckled, dragging himself slightly further down the limb. "A most fitting metaphor. Juggling with words has always been but one among my many remarkable." Logen grunted as he swung the sword over his head. "It bit through the branch where it met the trunk, clean through, almost to the other side, more than far enough that Longfoot's weight ripped through the rest, and brought the whole limb, navigator and all, crashing down into the weeds below. Slow and simple enough for you?" Luther spluttered with laughter as he sharpened his short sword, and Logen laughed as well. Laughing with a man was a good step forward. First comes the laughter, then the respect, then the trust. "God's breath!" shouted Longfoot, scrabbling his way out from under the branch. "Can a man not eat without disturbance?" "Sharp enough," chuckled Luther. "No doubt." Logen hefted the sword in his hand. "Yes, this Canidius knew how to make a weapon, all right. Making weapons is what Canidius did." Bayaz had stepped through the crumbling archway and into the overgrown orchard. "He was the master maker, after all. The one that you hold is among the very least of what he made, forged to be used in a war against his brothers." "Brothers," snorted Luther. "I know exactly how he felt. There's always something. Usually a woman, in my experience." He gave his short sword one last stroke with the whetstone. "And where women are concerned, I always come out on top." "Is that so?" Bayaz snorted. "As it happens, a woman did enter the case, but not in the way you're thinking." Luther gave a sickening grin. "What other way is there to think about women? If you asked Mega." A large clod of bird shit splattered against the shoulder of his coat, throwing specks of black and gray all over his hair, his face, his newly cleaned swords. "What the?" Pharaoh was squatting on top, wiping her hand on a spray of ivy. It was hard to tell with the bright sky behind, but Logen wondered if she might not have the trace of a smile on her face. Luther certainly wasn't smiling. "You fucking mad bitch," he screamed, scraping the white goo from his coat and flinging it at the wall. "Bunch of bloody savages." And he shoved angrily past and through the fallen arch. Laughter was one thing, it seemed, but the respect might be a while coming. "In case any of you pinks are interested," called Pharaoh, "the riders are gone." "Which way?" asked Bayaz. "Away east, the way we came, riding hard. looking for us. Who knows? They didn't have signs. But if they are looking, more than likely they will find our trail. The Magus frowned. Then you'd best get down from there. We need to move. He thought about it for a moment. And try not to throw any more shit. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.